Hello friends, about of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be really happy if you do so. Also, don't forget to hit the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you. I'm in my 20s, fresh out of a brutal breakup, and college had chewed me up and spit me out. I needed an escape, and fast. That's when I landed this gig as a park ranger. Perfect, right? Being outdoors, new challenges every day, and mostly working solo, just what the doctor ordered. The days were awesome. Hike around, check on things, maybe find a sweet spot to chill and read when the work was done. Pure bliss. But the nights, not so much. Especially when I got stuck with the night shift at the Sentinel. This watchtower was like something out of a horror movie. Massive, over 100 feet tall, made of this old pine that still smelled fresh. Basically a tiny cabin on stilts, overlooking the whole park. Inside it was bare bones, a couple of chairs, a desk, a single light bulb, and a fan that barely kept the mosquitoes away. And getting up there, 10 stories of stairs in the pitch black. Not exactly a walk in the park. But hey, the view was killer, especially on a clear night. You could see the whole forest spread out below you. My job was basically to watch for fires and anything else out of the ordinary. Most of the time, it was boring as hell. I'd bring a book or a journal just to keep myself entertained. And yeah, I might have dozed off a few times. Don't judge. Now you might think being a park ranger is all about rescuing lost puppies and helping old ladies cross the trail. But let me tell you, there's a dark side to it too. People get into fights, fall into fires, get lost and never found. And then there are the criminals. Yeah, criminals. Parks, especially at night, can be a magnet for shady characters. Drug deals, vandalism, even the occasional murder. I'd had my fair share of run-ins with squatters and weirdos, but nothing too crazy, except for this one night. It was late summer. A lot of the staff had already left for the season, and I was stuck with night duty at the Sentinel. I knew it was partly because I was the newbie, but I also suspected the older rangers were using it as an excuse to have their poker nights. Whatever, more peace and quiet for me. As the sun was setting, I headed to the main station for the shift change. The usual chatter filled the air-bear sightings, lost campers, the usual stuff. Then this woman walked in, and the mood shifted. She was in her 40s, dressed in workout clothes, and looked a little shaken. She told my boss, Jonesy, who was a total flirt, that she thought someone had been stalking her on the trail. They looked shadowy, she said, like they were afraid of the sun. She said they followed her for a while, making weird chittering and whistling noises, before she finally ran away. Jonesy sent a couple of guys to check it out, but they didn't find anything. The woman left, but her story stuck with me. Those weird noises, the shadowy figure, it was creepy as hell. And with a storm rolling in, I knew it was going to be a long night in the Sentinel. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I started my trek to the Sentinel. It was one of those nights where the darkness felt thick enough to choke on. The wind howled like a hungry wolf, and the air was heavy with the smell of rain. I was already spooked after that woman's story, and the whole vibe was screaming, "Get out." When I got to the base of the tower, I noticed something seriously creepy. Someone had carved a pair of eyes into the wood, just eyes staring out at me from the shadows. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but it definitely made my skin crawl. I started climbing the stairs, each step taking me deeper into the darkness. The wind whipped through the trees, and the tower swayed, making my stomach do flips. I kept expecting to see something lurking in the shadows, but thankfully, there was nothing but the creaking of the old wood and the rustling of leaves. I swear, my heart nearly jumped out of my chest. Someone had been up here, watching me, and they were probably still around, lurking somewhere in the shadows. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I clicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness, but I couldn't see anyone. The wind howled, and the rain started coming down, splattering against the wood. Going back up to the cabin felt like a death trap. I'd be cornered in that tiny space with whatever was out there. So I decided to head down, hoping I could make it to the ground before whoever was up there caught me. I started down the stairs, my heart pounding like a drum solo. I tried to be quiet, but the old wooden steps creaked with every move. And of course I'd left my walkie-talkie in the cabin. Brilliant. Completely alone, cut off from any help. As I rounded the landing on the 6th floor, I heard it, a whistle. It was that same wood thrush call the woman had described. But it wasn't a bird. It was someone down below, signaling to whoever was above me. They were hunting me, trapped. One above, one below, nowhere to go. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. I couldn't go up, and I couldn't go down. I was screwed. Then, in a moment of pure desperation, I did something incredibly reckless. I climbed over the railing and hung off the side of the stairs, my fingers clinging to the rough wood. My arms burned and my legs dangled in the empty space. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying they wouldn't see me. I heard footsteps coming down the stairs, slow and deliberate. They were getting closer. I held my breath, my body trembling. The footsteps stopped right above me. I could hear the person breathing so close I could almost feel their warmth. Then they started whistling again, the wood thrush call echoing through the darkness. A response came from below, confirming my worst fears. They were working together. The footsteps started moving again, this time going back up the stairs. Relief washed over me for a second, but then I realized their plan. They were going to trap me, block the stairs, and I'd be stuck hanging there until they decided to come back for me. I had to do something, and fast. I kicked off my boots, sending them tumbling down the stairs. They landed with a thud on the landing below. The footsteps stopped. They thought I was down there. I pulled myself back over the railing, my arms screaming in protest. I sprinted up the stairs, my heart pounding like a drum. I could hear them coming after me, their footsteps heavy and fast. I burst into the cabin, slamming the door behind me. I leaned against it, bracing myself for the impact. They hit the door with a thud, and I stumbled backwards. They kept hitting it, harder and harder. The door creaked and groaned, threatening to give way. I screamed, my voice raw with fear. Then I saw the eyes. Another pair carved into the wall above the window, and a message scrawled beneath them. You watch us, but who's watching you? I felt a surge of adrenaline, a primal instinct to survive. I ran across the room and sat on the insulated stool, my feet off the ground. The door burst open, and two figures lunged at me, a knife glinting in the dim light. I screamed, and then, boom, the world exploded in a blinding flash of white. Finally, I reached the cabin at the top. I flipped on the light. That little bare bulb, suddenly my best friend. I settled into the chair, pulled out my book, and tried to focus. But my mind kept replaying the woman's story and those creepy eyes carved into the tower. About an hour into my shift, my walkie-talkie crackled. It was Jonesy, letting me know they were doing a patrol around the park. "Just you and the Wendigos tonight, huh?" he joked. "Hilarious," I muttered, trying to ignore the chills running down my spine. After they left, I tried to get back to my book, but the silence was deafening. The wind was picking up, and the tower was swaying even more. Then I heard it a creak. It sounded like it came from right outside the door. I froze, my heart pounding like a drum solo. Was it just the wind, or was there someone out there? I grabbed my walkie-talkie and tried to contact Jonesy, but he was out of range. Fantastic, just fantastic. I told myself it was probably nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I had to check. I couldn't just sit there and wait for whatever was out there to come knocking. I crept towards the door, my hand hovering over the knob. I took a deep breath and swung it open. Nothing. Just the empty landing and the darkness beyond. I stepped out onto the landing, the wind whipping at my face. I shone my flashlight down the stairs, but I couldn't see anything. I started to relax, thinking I was just being paranoid. Then I saw it. A small piece of reflective material, like it had been ripped off a jacket, lying on the stairs. I hadn't seen it on the way up. I bent down to pick it up, and that's when I saw the eyes. Another pair carved into the railing, staring up at me from the darkness. My blood ran cold. Someone had been here. Someone was watching me. The world went white, then black. I was thrown back against the wall, my ears ringing, my body numb. The smell of smoke filled the air, and I could hear the crackling of flames. I opened my eyes, my vision blurry. The cabin was on fire. The lightning strike had set the whole damn tower ablaze. Flames were licking at the walls, and smoke was billowing everywhere. Panic set in. I had to get out of there. I stumbled towards the door, coughing and choking on the smoke. I burst out onto the landing, the heat of the flames scorching my skin. I looked down, and my stomach lurched. The stairs were engulfed in flames. There was no way down. I turned and ran back into the cabin, the smoke thick and choking. I could hear the fire roaring behind me, like a hungry beast. I reached the window and looked out. Below me, the ground seemed miles away. I couldn't jump. I would die. I turned back to the flames, my eyes stinging, my lungs burning. I was trapped. There was no escape. Then I heard a voice, Jonesy's voice, cutting through the crackling flames. "Hold on," he yelled. "We're coming." I looked down, and there they were, the other rangers, their faces illuminated by the firelight. They were climbing the tower, their axes chopping at the burning wood, creating a path for me. I watched in disbelief as they reached the cabin, their faces grim but determined. They pulled me out of the window, carrying me down the makeshift ladder they had created. I collapsed on the ground, coughing and gasping for air. I looked back at the tower, the flames now engulfing the entire structure. It was terrifying, but also strangely beautiful. The fire burned for hours, the flames reaching for the sky, the smoke billowing out like a dark cloud. It was a spectacle, a raw display of nature's power, but it was also a symbol of hope. I had survived. Against all odds, I had escaped the flames, thanks to the bravery of my fellow rangers. I never went back to the Sentinel. The tower was rebuilt, but it wasn't the same. The memories of that night were too strong, the scars too deep. But I learned a valuable lesson that night. I learned that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. And I learned that the human spirit is capable of incredible resilience, even in the face of unimaginable terror. I left my job as a park ranger shortly after that. I needed a change, a fresh start, but I never forgot the lessons I learned in that burning tower, and I never forgot the friends who risked their lives to save mine. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I can still hear the crackling of the flames, the screams of the wind, and the whispers of the forest. But now, instead of fear, I feel a sense of awe, a reminder of the power and beauty of the natural world. Later, I found out those guys who attacked me were escaped convicts. They'd been hiding out in the park, probably planning to do God knows what to me. But the lightning, it took care of them. Nature had my back, in a way I never expected. That night in the tower, I was watching for danger, but it turned out danger was watching me. And in the end, it was nature herself that saved me. It's a memory I'll carry with me forever, a reminder that the world is full of surprises, and sometimes the things that scare us the most can also be the things that save us. It was around 3 in the afternoon when I heard a knock at the door of the ranger station. Pretty weird, considering it was the middle of winter in the Adirondacks. It was freezing out there, like 12 degrees, and the wind was howling like crazy. I was actually worried about the storm causing some damage to the station. I'd been keeping an eye on the weather all day, and it looked like a blizzard was headed our way. Usually I don't lock the front door. Hikers and campers often stop by on their way up the trail, either to register their campsite or just to grab a hot cup of coffee. But the door had been sticking lately, so I'd been keeping it locked until I could fix it. This knock was super light, almost hesitant, like the person was unsure about knocking at all. I almost didn't hear it over the wind and the creaking of the station. I was in the middle of writing an email about getting a new generator. Mine was on the fritz, and I had to stop and listen hard to make sure I wasn't imagining things. When the knock came again, a little louder this time, I got up and went to the door. Outside were 5 people, 3 guys and 2 girls, all bundled up in these brand new, expensive-looking winter coats and snow pants. They all looked like they were ready to climb Mount Everest, not hike a trail in the Adirondacks. Tourists, I thought. Probably from Europe and probably not used to this kind of weather. "Hi there," I said cheerfully, stepping back to let them in. "Come in out of the snow and warm up by the fire." The guy who'd been knocking said something in Spanish to his friends, then turned back to me with a grin and stepped inside. The rest followed quickly, eager to get out of the cold. I closed the door behind them and made sure it was locked. "Gracias, sir. I am Martin," the guy said, pulling back his hood and unzipping his coat. He introduced the others. This is Lucas, Diego, Sophia, and Triana. I nodded to each of them. It is very cold, Martin continued. We come to visit USA from Spain to see your beautiful mountains. He had a thick accent, but his English was pretty good. But it seems a storm is coming, and we fear there will be too much snow. Unfortunately, we are not so prepared for that. You're telling me, I said, patting him on the shoulder. I opened the door to the shelter room and turned on the lights. Looks like we're in for a blizzard tonight. Bad time for a winter hike. I smiled. Luckily, we've got plenty of space for you folks to wait out the storm. There's coffee over there, and bunks and a sitting area in here. They all looked a little confused, so I just gestured to the room with a smile. They grinned and thanked me as they hurried inside, dropping their packs and taking off their gear. I made sure everyone had something hot to drink, then went back to my desk. They seemed like nice people, and I figured they'd be fine. About an hour later, there was another knock at the door. This one was slow and uneven, not at all like the first knock. I sighed and headed back to the door. I hadn't had any visitors in over a week, and now I had a whole crowd. I unlocked the door and put on my best welcoming smile. Standing in the doorway, covered in snow, was a man about my height. Unlike the others, he wasn't wearing fancy winter gear. His clothes were mismatched, like he'd grabbed whatever he could find. "Hey there," I said, waving him in. "Come on in out of the snow." He didn't say anything, just nodded slightly and walked past me. He smelled pretty bad, and I wondered if he was one of those hermits who lived out in the woods. He went straight to the bunk room and sat down on an empty bunk in the corner. He didn't take off his coat or say anything to the others. I noticed he didn't have a pack with him, which made me think he might live nearby. The others tried to be friendly, but he just sat there watching them with this weird little smile on his face. It was kind of creepy. They gave up after a while and went back to talking among themselves. I wondered if he was in shock or something. It was getting really cold out there, and he wasn't dressed for it. I thought about checking him for frostbite, but something about him made me hesitate. I stood there in the doorway to the bunk room for a minute, just watching. Something about the newcomer felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the way he moved, the way he didn't say anything, the way he just sat there perfectly still, it was strange. There was something else too, something I couldn't quite grasp, like a feeling of unease in the back of my mind. I found myself hoping he'd warm up and then be on his way. Looking at the others, I realized they must have felt it too. They'd all kind of clustered at the end of the table, farthest away from him, and they were talking more quietly than before. I noticed them glancing at him every now and then, but only for a second, like they were making sure he hadn't moved. And none of them had their back to him. I was about to go talk to him, just to shake off the weird feeling, when Martin came up to me, looking worried. "Sir, my friends and I are worried about the other campers," he said. This caught my attention. There weren't any campers registered to be out here today. Was the newcomer one of them? Maybe they were in trouble. "What campers?" I asked. "One." He pointed vaguely north. We passed their campsite on our way to the observation point before the weather turned bad, maybe half a kilometer up the trail. He glanced back at the stranger. There it was again, that same feeling of unease. There were 3 of them. Martin continued. 2 men and a woman. They had tents set up and seemed well prepared for the storm. We stopped and warmed ourselves by their fire for a bit. They seemed very experienced. Well, it sounds like they should be okay, I said, trying to sound reassuring. They should have checked in with me, but if they're as prepared as you think, I'm sure they'll be fine. I'll check on them when the storm passes. He looked at the stranger again, then back at me, like he was trying to tell me something with his eyes. He lowered his voice. The campers, they were all wearing very good clothing. Sophia's brother is a climber, and she recognized their gear as similar to what he uses. Even better news then, I started to say, but Martin cut me off. Exactly like the pants that man is wearing now, he said quietly. I looked over at the man again, noticing his mismatched clothes. His gloves looked thin and totally unsuitable for this weather. How long had he been out here? That feeling in the back of my mind was getting stronger. Something wasn't right. Are you sure? I asked Martin. He shrugged. As sure as we can be. Sophia says she is certain. Was this man with them? I asked. But I already knew the answer. Martin shook his head. No, I have never seen him before. He leaned in closer and lowered his voice. This man, there is something. He trailed off, unable to find the right words. I nodded. I know. I feel it too. I went back to my desk and got my handgun. I put it on my belt, grabbed my heavy jacket, and pulled my hat down over my ears. Martin followed me. I made sure we were out of sight of the bunk room. I'm going to check on the camp, I said. Have you ever handled a shotgun? He nodded. I hunt pheasant with my cousins. I am a very good shot. Good, I said. There's a shotgun in my room, if you need it. He just nodded. I should be back within the hour, I said. Keep him here until I return, but don't do anything unless you have to. Be careful, Martin said. I feel some darkness in the air. I nodded and stepped out into the wind. The icy wind hit me like a wall, cutting through my clothes. The snow was already halfway up my shins, making it tough to walk. I was headed to the campsite Martin had described, one of the few marked spots along this trail. Campers were supposed to check in with me before setting up, but not everyone did. I was starting to get a really bad feeling about this. I didn't know what I was going to find. If I was lucky, the campers would be safe and sound in their tents. If not, well, I'd deal with that when I got there. Half an hour later, I reached the campsite, or what was left of it. The tents were shredded, ripped to pieces, flapping in the wind like crazy. It looked like a bear attack, but I hadn't seen a bear in months, and we'd never had one attack anyone in this area. I pulled out my gun and cautiously approached the tents. Nothing. No signs of people, no blood, no struggle. Just destroyed tents. And then I saw it. A flash of dark gray, half hidden in the snow. I walked over and kicked it with my boot. It was a pair of thick winter pants, ripped and covered in what looked like blood. They were the same kind of pants the stranger was wearing. I picked them up, and this awful smell hit me. I dropped them like they were on fire. A few feet away, I saw something blue in the snow. It was a winter jacket, and when I brushed the snow off, I realized it was still wrapped around an arm, a human arm. I stumbled back in shock, tripping over the rocks and falling on my ass. I sat there, freaking out for what felt like forever. It was so cold, and I could feel the panic rising in my throat. I was pointing my gun at the pants like they were going to jump up and attack me. Finally, I snapped out of it. I jumped up and started running back to the station, my mind racing. What the hell was going on? Was that guy some kind of serial killer? As I ran, I thought about those pants. They hadn't just been torn, they'd been shredded. And the blood, it was too fresh. Had the stranger replaced his pants with the ones he'd taken from his victim? And then I thought about how none of his clothes matched, how his boots and gloves weren't even right for winter. How long had this been happening? I finally made it back to the station, the wind and snow whipping around me. I could barely see, but I could make out the lights from the windows. And then I noticed the front door was open. My heart started pounding. No one in their right mind would leave the door open in this weather. I crept towards the door, gun drawn. I pushed it open slowly, the wind and the creaking of the station covering the sound of my footsteps. And then I saw it. The sight that greeted me was like something out of a nightmare. A body lay behind the door, blocking it. It was one of the women, but her head and upper body were mangled. Blood was everywhere, the smell of it thick in the air. I could hear this wet, tearing sound coming from the bunk room. The lights in there were flickering like crazy. I crept towards the bunk room, my heart pounding. The scene inside was even worse. Bodies were scattered everywhere, torn and bloody. I could feel the heat from all the violence. Empty shotgun shells lay on the floor next to the shotgun itself. It was out of ammo. Martin's body was nearby, ripped to shreds. It looked like he'd been through a meat grinder. And then I saw him, the stranger. He was crouched over one of the bodies, tearing at it with his mouth. His hands, they weren't hands anymore. They were long, sharp claws. I didn't hesitate. I raised my gun and fired. The stranger jerked back and screamed, this awful, high-pitched sound. I fired again. He leaped onto the wall, his claws digging into the wood. He turned his head to look at me, and his eyes were completely black. His jaw was unhinged, and his mouth was stretched wide in this horrifying grin, full of sharp teeth. He jumped to another wall, and I fired again and again. I don't know how many times I shot, but I hit him. Black stuff was oozing from the wounds, and I could hear a rattling sound in his breathing. With one final scream, he jumped through the window, shattering the glass, and then he was gone. I was alone, surrounded by bodies. My gun was empty. That was almost a year ago. I don't work in the field anymore. I'm stuck in an office in the city, as far away from the woods as I can get. After the investigation, they said the deaths were caused by an animal attack. I tried to go back to my old post, but I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that creature. Sometimes, I thought I could hear it screaming. I slept with my gun and my shotgun, and I kept the doors locked. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, maybe looking for me. I searched online for answers, talked to anyone who claimed to know about monsters or aliens, but no one could explain what I saw. And then I found an article about something called the uncanny valley. It's this idea that the more human-like something looks, the creepier it gets. The article said it might be because, a long time ago, there were predators that looked almost human, and our brains are still wired to be afraid of them. I started to wonder if these things have always been hiding among us. Just yesterday, I was on the subway, and I saw this woman sitting by herself. Everyone seemed to be avoiding her. There was nothing obviously wrong with her, but something just felt off. I can't escape the feeling that it's not over, that they're still out there. I was a rookie park ranger, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I'm not going to say where this all went down because honestly, I don't want anyone stumbling into that nightmare forest. Let's just say it was deep in the woods, somewhere you wouldn't want to get lost. You see, when you first become a ranger, you think you're ready for anything. You hear all these crazy stories from the older guys, weird disappearances, creepy animal sightings, things that go bump in the night. But me, I was arrogant. I thought it was all just campfire tales, a way to haze the new guy. Boy, was I wrong. It all started in the spring, about 3 months into my gig. People started reporting these freaky-looking animals, all skinny and mangy with white eyes and weird proportions, like something out of a horror movie. Most of us figured it was some kind of disease, but there was this one older ranger, Briggs, who was freaking out. Briggs was a tough old dude, ex-Navy SEAL, could probably bench press a truck. But he was seriously spooked by these animal sightings. He kept saying we should close the park, that it wasn't safe. He even cornered me one day and gave me this whole speech about how there were things in the forest beyond human comprehension. He said he'd seen horrors in the war, but nothing compared to what he'd seen in those woods. Of course I didn't listen. I thought he was just losing it. But looking back, I wish I had paid attention. Briggs knew something was up. He saw the writing on the wall and got the hell out of there before things got really bad. A few weeks later, the situation escalated. People started getting attacked by these creepy animals. They said the animals were acting smart, like they were hunting them. We were baffled. We tried to track down and put down the sick animals, but they were always one step ahead of us. Then the disappearances started. People vanishing without a trace, leaving behind only their abandoned campsites and belongings. We didn't know if it was connected to the weird animals, but a sense of dread started to settle over the park, and then came the night that changed everything. It was a typical summer night at the ranger station. Me, Hank, this big burly guy, and Lyda, a petite teenager interning for the summer, were on the overnight shift. Things had been quiet. A little too quiet, actually. Then, around 10 p.m., this young woman came bursting through the door. She looked like she'd been through hell, covered in dirt and scratches, clothes ripped to shreds. She was hysterical, sobbing and babbling incoherently. Hank managed to calm her down enough to get her to talk, and what she told us was absolutely chilling. She'd been camping with her friends when these creepy, deformed animals showed up. They sounded just like the ones people had been reporting, skinny, mangy, with those freaky white eyes. But these things were different. They were smart, they were organized, and they were hungry. She said they dragged her and her friends into this massive cave system, which was weird, because there weren't any big caves in the park, and trapped them in this sticky, web-like substance. Then, one by one, they started picking them off, feeding on them in the darkness. She managed to escape, but her friends, they were gone. She was the only survivor. We were horrified. This wasn't just some animal attack. This was something else, something sinister. We tried to call the police, but the phone lines were dead. So we decided to take the woman to the police station ourselves. We figured we could shut down the station for the night and get her somewhere safe. But as we were getting ready to leave, the woman started screaming again. She was pointing at the window, her eyes wide with terror. "It's here!" she shrieked. "They're here!" I looked out the window, and my blood ran cold. Standing outside was one of those creatures, tall and gaunt, with the head of a coyote and those terrifying white eyes. It grinned at us, its teeth bared in a snarl. "Come out," it growled. The woman was panicking, begging us to protect her. I was frozen in fear. But then Lyda snapped me out of it. She smacked me across the face hard and then yelled, "Get your shit together. We need to get out of here." Then she pulled out a gun from her backpack. A gun? Where the hell did she get a gun? And why was she acting like a seasoned action hero all of a sudden? I didn't have time to dwell on it, because the creature was breaking through the window. Lita fired a shot, shattering the glass and sending the creature stumbling backwards. "Go, go, go," she yelled, and we all bolted for the door. Outside, the parking lot was swarming with those things. Dozens of them, all shapes and sizes, with those creepy white eyes. And leading them was the coyote creature, its arm missing, its eyes burning with rage. Lyda fired another shot, and the creatures recoiled. She threw a flare into the crowd, and they scattered. We made a break for Hank's truck, Lyda firing her gun as we ran. We piled into the truck. Hank slammed his foot on the gas, and we sped off into the night. I thought we were safe, but Lyda just shook her head. "Don't relax yet," she said. "We're not out of the woods." And she was right. We were hauling ass down the road, Hank wrestling the truck like a rodeo bull, when bam! Something slammed into the side of the truck, and we went flying. The world turned upside down, and I swear I saw a flash of fur right before we crashed into a tree. I hung there, suspended by my seatbelt, ears ringing, everything aching. Lita was the first to come to, cursing like a sailor. "Truck's toast," she yelled, scrambling out. "Everyone okay?" We were banged up, but alive. Hank had a nasty gash on his arm. Abigail was out cold, and Lyda had a few cuts and bruises. But considering we'd just been in a freaking rollover, we were lucky to be breathing. We dragged Abigail out of the wreckage, and Lyda checked the damage. The truck was completely totaled. No way we were driving out of there. "We're going on foot," Lyda announced, ripping the sleeves off her shirt to bandage Abigail's wounds. "Come on, let's move before those things catch up." We followed Lyda, sticking to the shadows, the forest eerily silent around us. The only sounds were our own ragged breaths, and the occasional growl echoing in the distance. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Suddenly, this monstrous porcupine thing the size of a wolf burst from the bushes. Lita reacted instantly, firing a shot into its chest. It screeched and dissolved into that black goo, but the gunshot attracted more of those creatures. "Run," Lyda yelled, and we took off. We sprinted through the trees, those things hot on our heels. Lyda, Hank, and I fired off shots whenever one got too close, but there were just too many of them. We burst into a clearing, and there it was, the coyote creature, bigger than ever, leading a whole pack of those monstrosities. Lita raised her gun, but it clicked empty. She was out of bullets. Before she could grab more ammo, this squirrel thing leaped out of a tree and tackled her. Hank tried to help, but Abigail, who had somehow snapped out of her daze, slammed him to the ground, and then she changed. Her body twisted and contorted, her eyes turning white, her teeth growing into fangs. She was one of them. She sank her teeth into Hank's neck, and he screamed. Lyda yelled at me to run, and I did. I didn't look back. I just ran, the sounds of the creature's growls and my friend's screams echoing in my ears. Something slammed into me from behind, and I went down hard. I saw a shadowy figure looming over me, and then everything went black. I woke up in darkness, unable to move. Panic clawed at my throat. Was I dead? Had those things dragged me back to that awful cave? Then I heard a groan. Ah, shit, Lita's voice muttered. Relief washed over me. She was alive. Lida? I croaked, my voice hoarse. Thank goodness you're still alive, she whispered back. But that means they caught you. Listen, I have a plan. But you have to do exactly what I say if you want to survive. What about Hank? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. A long silence followed. Hank's gone, Lida finally said, her voice heavy. Trust me, you don't want to know. She told me to stay quiet and not eat anything they offered. I didn't question her. I just lay there, suspended in that sticky web stuff, the darkness pressing in on me. I don't know how long we were there. It could have been hours, days. I lost track. The only sounds were the occasional shuffle and the distant echoes of growls and footsteps. Then I heard a ripping sound, followed by a thud and a grunt. I held my breath, hoping it was Lita escaping. Footsteps approached, and I cringed back against the cold stone wall. Something tore at my bindings, and I fell to the ground. Lida was there, ripping the sticky webbing away from me. Come on, she whispered, grabbing my hand. We have to go. I followed her through the darkness, my heart pounding. I could hear those things moving around us, their growls echoing through the tunnels. Lida seemed to know where she was going, pulling me into crevices and side tunnels whenever the creatures got too close. Finally, we reached a large opening, moonlight streaming in from above. It was a hole maybe 5 feet up leading to the surface, but there was no way we could reach it. I'll boost you, Lita said. Can you pull yourself out? I looked at her, and my jaw dropped. She had changed. Her eyes were glowing gold. Her teeth were sharp, and her nails had become claws. She looked feral. Trust me, she said, her voice firm. I nodded, and she lifted me with surprising strength. I scrambled out of the hole and into the forest. Then I reached down and helped Lida climb out. We didn't speak. We just moved through the forest, Lida leading the way. I didn't know where we were going, but I trusted her. She was my only hope. Suddenly, a voice boomed through the trees. It was the coyote creature, its voice deep and menacing. You're quite the clever little girl, it said. Such a shame you chose the wrong side. Lita snarled. Yeah? Why don't you come and handle me yourself, then? The coyote laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the trees. As you wish. It emerged from the shadows, and the fight began. It was a brutal, savage battle, the two of them tearing at each other with inhuman strength and speed. Trees were uprooted, the ground was torn apart, the air filled with snarls and growls. I watched in horror as Lida fought for her life. She was strong, but the coyote was stronger. It pinned her to the ground, its jaws open wide, ready to tear her apart. I knew I had to do something. I grabbed a rock and charged towards the coyote, hoping to distract it, but I was too late. The coyote lunged at Lida, its jaws closing around her head. Then a series of explosions ripped through the coyote's body. Black goo erupted from its wounds, and it dissolved into nothingness. Lyda scrambled to her feet, her eyes wide with shock. Briggs stepped out from the trees, a shotgun in his hand. "You sure made a mess here, huh?" he said, grinning. Lyda glared at him. "Took you long enough, Grandpa," she snapped. "We lost some good people while you were messing around." I stared at them, my mind reeling. What had just happened? Who was Lyda? And what were those things? Then darkness closed in, and I passed out. It was another night in paradise, or at least that's what the tourists thought. See, I was a ranger at this wildlife preserve in West Virginia, and lately my nights had been anything but peaceful. I'd barely arrived at the station when the calls started coming in, vacation homes getting broken into. 4 calls already. The thing is, people come out here to these fancy houses in the middle of the woods and think the animals are just gonna know to stay away. But these animals have never been hunted, never even been threatened by anything except bigger animals. They don't understand human boundaries. So yeah, it's a great vacation spot for people, and for the animals too. And tonight, it was my job to deal with the fallout. My first call was from an elderly couple who had a deer break into their house. Seriously, it crashed through their sliding glass door. They managed to trap it in a room and needed someone to come get it out. Guess who got that lovely job? When I got there, the couple looked like they'd seen a ghost. They were still in shock, eyes wide and everything. I told them to go to another room and close the door. Once they were out of the way, I found the closest door to the outside and opened it. Then I went to the room with the deer. I slowly opened the door, expecting, I don't know, a scared deer? Instead, the room was covered in blood. The deer was lying on the floor, panting. I walked towards it slowly, trying to give it an escape route. But the closer I got, the more I realized this deer wasn't going anywhere. Its side was covered in these huge claw marks. At first, I thought maybe a coyote had attacked it, but the marks were too far apart. They were big enough to be from a bear, but the individual claw marks were too spaced out. I'd never seen anything like it. It looked like Freddy Krueger had gotten to it. The deer's eyes were wide, but it didn't try to run. That was a bad sign. I rolled it over, and that's when I almost lost it. Its whole side was torn to shreds, and there were chunks of flesh missing. There were bite marks where the missing flesh should have been, but they were massive. Like shark bite massive. Blood was pouring out, and the deer was struggling to breathe. I knew it wasn't going to make it. I left the room, giving the poor thing some privacy in its final moments. When I went back in, it was dead. I took some pictures with my phone and tried to get the deer out to my truck without making too much of a mess. Then I went back inside to talk to the couple. When I opened the door to the room they were in, the woman screamed. The man's eyes were huge. I tried to calm them down, but it wasn't working. They were climbing on the furniture, trying to get away from me. "What's wrong?" I asked. The man pointed at me, his voice shaky. You're covered in blood. The deer got you," the woman said. "You've got rabies." "Or worse," the man added. "I'm sorry, folks," I said. "It's the deer's blood." "You killed it just for breaking in?" the woman asked. "What? No, it was already injured." I just took it to my truck. They calmed down a little. So you don't have rabies? The man asked. Or anything else, the woman added, still scared. No, I'm fine, I said. They looked me over, making sure I wasn't hurt. Then they asked the question I didn't want to answer. So what killed the deer? The man asked. I don't know, I said honestly. I didn't want to freak them out again. Probably a coyote. A coyote, the man said, panicking again. Or a bear, I said, trying to calm him down. A bear? The woman shrieked. Look, you've had a rough night, I said. If I were you, We're leaving, the woman said, dragging her husband out of the room. That sounds like a good idea, I said. And then, like an idiot, I added, I hope you enjoyed your stay. They didn't answer. I heard their car start and speed away. I went back to the room where the deer had been and started looking for clues. It wasn't hard to find the trail of blood. I followed it through the kitchen and out the smashed glass door. Outside, I turned on my flashlight. The trail was a little harder to follow, but I could still see drops of blood. I followed them towards the pond behind the house. There were signs of a struggle by the pond. This must have been where the deer was attacked. There were other tracks there, but they didn't make any sense. They were huge, and the shape was weird. If I had to describe them, I'd say they looked like duck prints, but massive, way bigger than any duck I'd ever seen. A giant duck with shark teeth? Yeah, I'm not putting that in my report. Then it hit me. They were footprints, but with swim fins. But why? Why go to all that trouble to poach a deer when you could just use a tranquilizer gun? A disturbing thought crept into my mind. What if this guy is just a psycho, getting his kicks by killing animals with his bare hands? I thought about the mental hospital in the next county and wondered if they had an escapee. I didn't like that idea. It didn't explain the huge bites on the deer, and it meant we had someone dangerous on the loose. What if he decided to go after people next? I looked at the house, wondering how many vacationers were nearby and how many were armed. As I was thinking about this, I heard something behind me. I spun around and shone my light, but there was nothing there. I saw a ripple in the middle of the pond. Probably just a fish, I thought. I took some more pictures and headed back to my truck. I had more calls to answer, and this weird mystery would have to wait. My next stop was another vacation home about 3 miles away, where another break-in had been reported. When a woman in her 30s answered the door, she took a step back. "Oh my," she said, looking at the dried blood on my uniform. "Good evening, ma'am," I said. "Sorry about the mess. Did you report a break-in?" "Yes, we did. Please come in," she said. But she kept her distance as she closed the door. She led me upstairs to the kitchen. I was expecting more blood, but this was a different kind of mess. The door had been forced open, but not smashed. The latch had been unlocked, and the door slid open. There were those same weird, giant duck prints. My blood ran cold. This house was miles away from the other one. How many other people were in danger? The woman showed me the rest of the kitchen. There were cans of sardines and tuna that had been opened and eaten, but they hadn't been opened with a can opener. It looked like they'd been torn open with claws. I shuddered, imagining the strength it would take to do that. Then I saw it. A small puddle of blood next to one of the tuna cans. "Ma'am, could I get a sandwich bag?" I asked. She gave me one and I carefully scooped up the blood. I put it in my pocket and went outside. Behind the house, just like the last one, there was a pond. I followed the tracks and they disappeared at the water's edge. I shone my light over the water, but all I saw was a turtle. "What should we do?" the woman asked, startling me. I hadn't heard her come outside. "I'll send someone to fix your door in the morning," I said. "In the meantime, maybe sleep in a room with a lock. I'm sure they won't be back, but just in case." She didn't seem reassured, but she thanked me as I left. The next 2 calls were just teenagers stealing beer. No blood, no weird tracks, just kids being kids. I went back to the station, changed out of my bloody uniform, and spent the rest of the night writing reports. When my shift was over, I went to the mental hospital in the next county and asked if they had any patients who'd escaped recently. The nurse looked at me like I was crazy. "We don't have escapes," she said, all proud of herself. I left, not convinced. Next, I stopped at the local police department. I asked a friend of mine if they could analyze the blood sample I'd collected. I told him I thought there might be an escapee from the mental hospital, and the blood might help us find him. It was well past noon by the time I got to bed. When I got to work that night, it was chaos. There had been more break-ins, and people were freaking out. The owner of the resort was furious. People were canceling their reservations and demanding refunds. He stormed up to me as soon as I walked in. "You told people to go home?" he yelled. I merely suggested, "Do you want to pay their rent out of your salary? I work for the state, not you," I said. He turned red. "Would you rather see people in body bags instead of animals?" I asked. "That wouldn't be good for business, would it?" He got even angrier and stormed off, muttering, "We'll see." I investigated 5 break-ins that night. Only 2 of them were real. The rest were fake, just so people could get their money back. The 2 real break-ins were the same as before. Broken window, seafood cans torn open with claws, and those weird tracks leading to the pond. I followed the tracks to the water's edge and stared at the pond. I knew these ponds were all designed the same, about 40 yards across and 5 feet deep in the middle. If someone was using them to hide, they'd have to hold their breath for a long time. I watched the surface for 20 minutes. No bubbles, no movement. After I finished my reports, I decided to do some more investigating. I went home, grabbed my swim trunks, mask, and snorkel, and went back to the most recent break-in. I waded into the water, not sure what I was expecting to find. A snake swam past me, and I kept going until I couldn't touch the bottom anymore. I floated on the surface, looking down. There was a dark spot on the bottom of the pond. I thought it was a rock, but I swam down to check it out. The deeper I swam, the deeper it got. The light disappeared. I was swimming straight down for what felt like a whole minute, and I still hadn't reached the bottom. I looked up. The surface was just a tiny point of light. My lungs were burning. I had to go back up. I swam as hard as I could, but it felt like I was swimming through mud. Something was pulling me down like a current. I was almost out of air when I finally broke the surface, gasping for breath. I swam to the shallows and collapsed on the shore. I lay there for a long time, trying to catch my breath and figure out what had just happened. Had I gotten turned around somehow, or was there something else down there? I had to find out. I drove to a dive shop and rented some equipment, including a flashlight. Then I went back to the pond. This time, when I swam down to the dark spot, I could see what it was. It was a tunnel. I swam deeper, and the sides of the tunnel closed in around me. I'd never been claustrophobic before, but I was starting to panic. I couldn't turn around. There wasn't enough room. I forced myself to stay calm, to keep breathing. I was close to a full-blown panic attack when the tunnel suddenly opened up again. I could see a light ahead. I swam towards it and broke the surface. I was in another pond, the one from the break-in the night before. Somehow, there was a hidden tunnel connecting the two ponds. That's how he's doing it, I realized. He's swimming from one pond to the next. I knew how he was getting away, but I still didn't know who he was. I was tempted to swim back through the tunnel, but I was still shaken up. I went back to the dive shop and asked about their customers. No one knew, no one who needed their tanks refilled more than once a week. The next closest dive shop was over 100 miles away. I went home, frustrated. It wasn't making sense. He had to be getting air from somewhere. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the tunnel, about how he was doing it. Then I had an idea. I borrowed a couple of trail cameras and set them up at each pond. I needed to see what was going on, how this guy was getting air. I also wanted to get a good look at him so we could catch him. I stayed away from the ponds that night, hoping he would show up. In the morning, I collected the cameras and took them home. I downloaded the footage and started watching. Just as the second video finished downloading, my phone rang. "Hello," I said. "Hey John, it's Steve. I got the results from that blood you gave me." "Great," I said, hitting play on the video. "Were you able to get a match on any hospital records?" "Not exactly." "Why not?" I asked, as a ghostly green image appeared on the screen. It was blurry, but it was definitely a man-sized figure walking towards the camera. I clicked to the next frame and froze. "Well, the thing is, the blood you gave me, it came back as reptile DNA. I heard his words, but they didn't make sense." I stared at the image on the screen, my mind reeling. "Are you there?" Steve asked. "Yes. Sorry," I said. "Could you send me a copy of your findings?" "Sure, no problem." "Thanks," I said. "You really helped me figure this out." "Anytime," he said, and hung up. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. It didn't look real. It couldn't be real. But there it was. Not a man in a wetsuit, but a creature, a monster. It had a wide mouth full of sharp teeth, just like the bites on the deer. It had webbed feet with claws, and claws on its hands too. It was a nightmare come to life. I printed the images and rushed to the station to show the other rangers. They were shocked, some even laughed, thinking I was messing with them. Then the owner of the timeshares walked in. "What's going on?" he asked, looking at me with suspicion. "It seems like John has solved the case of the break-ins," one of the rangers said. The owner came over and looked at the pictures. He picked up the lab report and read it. Then he smiled. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "I've never seen anything like it." He grinned. "This is money," he said, holding up the picture. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Those idiots who hunt cryptids, they'll pay a fortune to see this. And then there's the TV shows, the merchandise." He was practically giddy. "You just saved my business." "I don't think you understand," I said. "This thing is dangerous. If you saw what it did to that deer." So what do you want to do? Kill it? Maybe not kill it, I said, but we need to capture it, take it somewhere safe where it can't hurt anyone. You idiot, he yelled. I could make a mint. I wouldn't even have to repair those houses. People would be lining up to see this thing. But what about the people? I asked. Who cares about the people? He said. I've got the chance of a lifetime, and you want to throw it away because you're scared someone might get hurt. He was furious. I was furious. Then he suddenly calmed down. Charles, he said to the lead ranger, this is a wildlife preserve, right? Yes, Charles said cautiously. And the wildlife is protected by law, right? Well, I guess so, Charles said. What if those animals are dangerous? I asked. How many deer were killed by coyotes last year? The owner asked. Dozens, Charles said. Did we remove the coyotes? No, Charles admitted. The owner looked at me triumphantly. John, Charles said, I know you mean well, but you're going to have to let this go. I glared at him. And what happens when this thing decides it likes to eat humans? 1. Everyone in the room looked away, except the owner. He was beaming. I knew I'd lost. I took off my badge and left. If that was the end of my story, I would say I had failed, but I wasn't going to let that happen. I took my pension and rented one of the houses on the preserve. The owner had leaked the cryptid story to the media, and just as he'd predicted, the hunters and TV crews showed up in droves. But my goal was different. I knew the creature was real. I knew how it was getting around. I was going to stop it. I stayed at one of the houses that had been broken into. Every night I took a huge tuna and laid it out by the pond. Then I sat in the dark and waited. The first night, the creature approached cautiously. It sniffed the fish for a long time before grabbing it and diving into the pond. Each night, I did the same thing. The creature became less cautious. It was being fed, and the hunters were finding nothing. There were no sightings as long as I kept feeding it. As the days passed with no cryptid sightings, the hunters started getting angry. They called the owner a fraud. His reputation was ruined. In desperation, he hired an actor to wear a creature suit and pretend to be the monster. Of course, everyone saw through it, and the owner's reputation was destroyed. I had rented the house for 2 weeks. Between the rent and the fish, my money was running out. I had kept people safe, but what would happen when I stopped feeding the creature? What would happen when it got desperate and started going after people again? I had 3 nights left. The preserve was a ghost town. I was the only one left. I sat there, staring at the tuna on the table, a bottle of bleach next to it. Let it live and see what happens, or kill it. I thought about it for a long time. Both options had terrible consequences. Then I chose a third option, a much more dangerous one. I took the fish out and laid it by the pond. Then I backed up a few feet and stood there. Over an hour passed before the water stirred. The creature's head emerged, and it saw me. I stood perfectly still. It approached slowly and stopped a few feet away. The fish between us. It studied me, sniffing the air. Then it got agitated. Maybe it recognized my scent. It hissed, but then it bent down and took the fish, keeping its eyes on me the whole time. Once it had the fish, it did the most incredible thing I've ever seen. It leaped 20 feet in the air and dove into the pond without making a splash. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and collapsed on the ground, shaking. When I'd recovered, I went inside and fell into a restless sleep. That was only the first part of my plan. The next night would decide everything. I did the same thing as the night before, but this time I didn't bring any fish. The creature approached, looking for the tuna. I showed it my empty hands. It sniffed them and growled. It could smell the fish on my skin. It hissed and flexed its claws. I stared into its face, at those huge teeth, and swallowed hard. I forced myself to stay still, to show it I wasn't a threat. My heart hammered in my chest. It opened its jaws, and I could see those teeth up close. Its breath was awful. I closed my eyes, not knowing if I would ever open them again. Seconds passed, then minutes. I opened my eyes, and I was alone. I had made my decision. It had shown restraint, and so would I. I went inside, packed my things, and left. I could only hope that the people who remained, including my former co-workers, would be safe. I went home and slept, but my dreams were troubled. In the morning, there was a report in the newspaper about a break-in at the preserve. The only thing that had been taken was cans of tuna. I smiled. I wondered how long it would stay that way. If you're reading this, don't go looking for this thing. If you see it, don't tell anyone. Just leave it alone and hope for the best. Alright, so I still can't explain why I went to Mount Rainier. I mean, I know what I was trying to find, but the whole thing was just weird. See, I have this thing about getting obsessed with stuff. Like, really obsessed. 1 minute I'm chilling on the couch, scrolling through YouTube. The next minute I'm diving head first into some rabbit hole of information. It could be anything, weird disappearances, historical mysteries, you name it. Once it grabs me, I can't let it go until I've figured it all out. This time my obsession started with a YouTube video about missing 411 cases. You know, those strange disappearances in national parks? People vanishing without a trace, search dogs losing the scent, bodies turning up in impossible places. Yeah, that stuff. Totally creepy, right? Anyway, I got hooked. I spent weeks watching videos, reading books, scouring online forums, anything I could find about these cases. The more I learned, the weirder it got. People disappearing in broad daylight, kids found miles away from where they went missing, search teams finding nothing but a single shoe. It was like something out of a horror movie. I started digging into the theories. Was it some secret government operation? Aliens? Bigfoot? Serial killers? The possibilities were endless, and honestly, some of them were pretty wild. But the one that really stuck with me was the idea of feral humans living in the parks. Basically, the theory is that during the Great Depression, people went into the wilderness to escape poverty and ended up forming these isolated communities. Generations later, their descendants became, well, feral. Like wild, cannibalistic humans living off the land and preying on unsuspecting hikers. It kinda made sense, in a twisted way. It explained why people disappeared without a trace, why some were found in bizarre locations, and why the National Park Service seemed so secretive about the whole thing. But there were some holes in the theory. For one thing, humans are messy. We leave trash, footprints, fire pits. There should be evidence of these feral communities if they existed. And the whole incest thing, wouldn't that lead to genetic problems and infertility? So I went back to the drawing board, trying to find another explanation. And then, one night, it hit me. Giant eagles. I know, it sounds crazy. But hear me out. Eagles are ambush predators. They carry their prey back to their nests, and they're known to scavenge on carcasses, which could explain why some victims are found with missing body parts. Plus, if these eagles were big enough to carry off a human, they'd probably be nesting in remote, inaccessible areas, which would make them hard to find. And then there was the whole military involvement thing. Why were the Green Berets being called in to search for missing people? They're not exactly search and rescue specialists. Maybe they were there to deal with these giant eagles. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became. But I needed proof. I had to see it for myself. So I packed my bags, grabbed my camera, and headed to Mount Rainier National Park. Now, I wasn't just going to wander into the woods blindly. I spent weeks studying up on eagles, their behavior, their hunting patterns, how to spot them without getting spotted myself. I even built a camouflage blind, like the kind hunters use, so I could hide and observe without spooking them. I chose Mount Rainier because it was close and had a history of weird disappearances. I figured if there were giant eagles anywhere, they'd be there. So, one morning, just as the sun was coming up, I hit the trail. It took me hours to find the perfect spot for my blind. I wanted a place with a good view of the surrounding area, but also enough cover to keep me hidden. Finally, I found a small hilltop with a cliff face on one side and a clearing on the other. It was perfect. I set up my blind and settled in for the long haul. I had packed enough food and water to last a few days, and I was determined to stay put until I saw something. The first 3 days were boring. I mostly saw deer, squirrels, the occasional bird. Nothing out of the ordinary. I started to wonder if I was wasting my time. Maybe the whole giant eagle thing was just a crazy theory. But then, on the 4th day, everything changed. I was watching this big buck grazing in the clearing when I noticed how quiet it had gotten. Even the birds had stopped singing. The deer seemed to sense something too, because it suddenly froze, its head raised, its ears twitching, and then I saw it. This massive shadow swooped down from the cliff face, its wings blocking out the sun. It was an eagle, but unlike any eagle I'd ever seen before. It was huge, easily 10 times the size of a normal eagle, with a wingspan that must have been 40 feet. Its talons were the size of my hands, and its beak was like a curved dagger. The deer didn't stand a chance. The eagle slammed into it, pinning it to the ground with its talons. I could hear the bones crunching from where I was hiding. It was brutal. I knew I had to get a picture. This was proof. I raised my camera and snapped a photo, but the sound of the shutter must have startled the eagle, because it suddenly looked up and stared straight at me. Its eyes were like golden fire, and they seemed to pierce right through the camouflage of my blind. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The eagle let out a screech and launched itself towards me. I screamed and scrambled out of the blind just as the eagle ripped it to shreds. I ran for my life, the eagle hot on my heels. I could hear its wings beating the air behind me, its talons scraping the ground. I didn't dare look back. I ran and ran, my lungs burning, my legs screaming for mercy. I stumbled and fell, scraping my knees and hands, but I got back up and kept running. Finally, I reached my car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the door open. I threw myself inside, locked the doors, and collapsed in the driver's seat, gasping for air. I looked back towards the woods, but the eagle was gone. I had escaped. But I knew I would never forget the sight of that monstrous bird, its eyes burning with primal hunger. I drove away from Mount Rainier as fast as I could, my mind reeling. I had been right. Giant eagles were real, and they were hunting people. I tried to tell people about what I had seen, but no one believed me. They just laughed and said I had an overactive imagination. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew that the National Park Service was hiding something. I still have nightmares about that eagle. I can still hear it screech, feel its talons tearing at my flesh. I'll never go back to Mount Rainier, and I'll never forget the day I discovered the truth about the missing 411. I bolted back to the tower, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. I slammed the door shut and frantically shoved the filing cabinet against it, hoping it would hold. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely load the rifle. I felt trapped like a rat in a cage. The rain was coming down even harder now, and the wind howled like a banshee. I could hear the creature moving around outside, its claws scraping against the metal of the tower. It was trying to get in. Then I heard a voice. It was Autumn's voice, but it sounded different, distorted, almost demonic. "Jake," she whispered. "Let me in." I froze. I knew it was a trick, but I couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe she was okay. Maybe she needed my help. "Jake," she pleaded. "Please, I'm cold. Let me in." I took a step towards the door, then stopped. I remembered the memo pad. "She will not help you." "Jake, I'm scared," she sobbed. "Please don't leave me out here." The voice was so convincing, so desperate. I almost reached for the doorknob, but then I remembered the other warning. "If you hear her crying, run." I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew it wasn't really Autumn out there. It was something else, something pretending to be her. Suddenly, there was a loud crash. The creature had slammed itself against the door, and the filing cabinet rattled. I screamed and stumbled backwards, tripping over the bed. The door creaked open, and I saw a glimpse of the creature's face. It was pale and gaunt, with glowing white eyes and a twisted smile. Blood dripped from its fangs, and its hair was matted and tangled. I raised the rifle and fired, but the bullet seemed to pass right through it. The creature let out a shriek and lunged at me. I screamed and rolled out of the way just as its claws tore through the bed where I had been lying moments before. I scrambled to my feet and fired again, but it was no use. The creature was too fast, too strong. It cornered me against the wall, its eyes burning into mine. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But then, something unexpected happened. The creature hesitated. It tilted its head, as if listening to something. Then it turned and leaped out the window, disappearing into the storm. I was left alone in the cabin, my heart pounding, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't know what had just happened, but I knew I had to get out of there. I grabbed my backpack and stumbled out of the tower, the rain soaking me to the bone. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to get as far away from that creature as possible. I ran through the forest, the wind and rain whipping at my face. I could hear the creature's cries echoing through the trees, but I didn't look back. I just kept running. I ran until I collapsed, exhausted and terrified. I lay there in the mud, the rain washing over me, my mind a blur of fear and confusion. I didn't know what that creature was or why it had attacked me. But I knew one thing: I would never forget the night I spent in the tower, the night I encountered the creature that could not die. I don't know how long I lay there, the rain beating down on me. Eventually I managed to pull myself to my feet. I was soaked, freezing, and my body ached all over. But I had to keep moving. I couldn't stay there. I stumbled through the forest, my clothes heavy with water, my vision blurred by the rain. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to find help. After what felt like hours, I saw a light in the distance. I staggered towards it, my legs barely able to hold me up. As I got closer, I saw that it was a cabin, small and rundown, but with a light glowing in the window. I knocked on the door, my knuckles numb with cold. A moment later, the door creaked open, and a woman peered out at me. She looked to be in her late 50s, with kind eyes and a weathered face. "Oh my goodness," she exclaimed, taking in my sorry state. "You're soaked. Come in, come in." She ushered me inside, and I gratefully collapsed onto a chair by the fire. The warmth of the flames slowly seeped into my bones, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I was safe. The woman, whose name was Martha, gave me a blanket and a cup of hot tea. I sipped the tea gratefully, the warmth spreading through my body. "What happened to you?" Martha asked, her voice filled with concern. I hesitated, not sure how to explain the events of the past few hours. How could I possibly tell this kind woman about the creature in the tower, the creature that could not die? I got lost in the storm," I mumbled, avoiding her gaze. Martha nodded sympathetically. "It's easy to do in these parts. The weather can change in an instant." She didn't press me for details, and I was grateful. I didn't think I could bear to relive the horror of that night. Martha let me stay in her cabin for the night, and I slept soundly for the first time in days. In the morning, she gave me some dry clothes and a map of the area. "The ranger station is about 10 miles south of here," she said. "Follow the trail, and you can't miss it." I thanked her profusely and set off. My spirits lifted. I was still shaken by my experience, but I was alive, and I was determined to get back to civilization and put the whole ordeal behind me. I reached the ranger station later that day, and they were relieved to see me. Apparently, they had been searching for me after I failed to report in. I told them I had gotten lost in the storm, and they didn't question me further. I was given a new assignment, far away from Mount Rainier. I never told anyone about the creature in the tower. I knew they wouldn't believe me, and besides, I didn't want to think about it anymore. But even now, years later, I still have nightmares about that night. I can still hear Autumn's cries, see her glowing eyes, feel her claws tearing at my flesh, and I know that somewhere out there, in the depths of the forest, the creature that cannot die is still waiting. So, there I was, fresh out of ranger school, ready to take on the world. First day on the job, and they stick me in the middle of nowhere, Montana. Seriously, this place was so remote. I'm pretty sure Bigfoot was my next-door neighbor. The drive up was something else. Picture this: Endless trees, mountains that looked like they were trying to poke holes in the sky, and storm clouds making everything look super ominous. I was like, okay, this is officially the most Montana thing ever. I was pumped though. This ranger gig was my dream, and I was determined to prove I could handle it. But as I was driving up this crazy narrow dirt road to the ranger station, I started getting this weird feeling in my gut. Like maybe this wasn't going to be all campfires and sing-alongs. The station itself was basically a cabin. Cozy, but definitely not what I was expecting. And then I met Earl, the head ranger. Dude was like a grizzly bear in human form, gruff, intimidating, and not big on smiles. "You're late," he growled, checking his watch. Sorry sir, the roads." I started to explain. "The roads are always like this, kid." He cut me off. "You're in Montana now. Be prepared for anything." Okay, message received loud and clear. I felt like I was getting a scolding from my dad or something. Inside the station there was another ranger, Daniel Black Elk, total opposite of Earl, quiet, calm, with this long black hair and an air of mystery about him. Earl didn't even bother introducing us at first. Anyway, Earl throws me a map and basically says, "This is your territory. Patrol it. Look for poachers, illegal campers, anything shady. And don't screw up. No pressure, right?" I'm looking at this map, and it's huge. My territory was like 1,000,000 acres of forest, mountains, and who knows what else. I was starting to realize just how alone I was out here. "What about this poaching?" I asked. "Who are we dealing with?" "Locals, mostly," Earl said, with this look on his face that said, "Don't mess with these guys." Apparently they were a mix of sport hunters and guys just trying to make a buck, and they knew these woods like the back of their hand. "Sounds kinda dangerous," I said, trying to sound brave. "It can be," Earl said, looking out the window. "But there are worse things out there than poachers." Okay, now he was just freaking me out. Worse things? Like what? But he wouldn't say another word. And that's when I started to wonder if maybe I'd gotten in over my head. The first week was interesting, to say the least. Patrolling the forest was seriously creepy. These trees were massive, and they always seemed to be watching me. Every little sound, a twig snapping, leaves rustling, made me jump. I felt like I was in a horror movie, just waiting for something to jump out and grab me. Daniel came with me on a few patrols, which was actually pretty cool. He was like a freaking ninja, knew the woods inside and out, could track animals like nobody's business. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was usually to point out something I would have totally missed, like a hidden animal trail or a patch of quicksand. I felt a lot safer with him around. One day, we were hiking through this super thick part of the forest, and I finally asked him about himself. Turns out, his family had been living in this area forever, like way before it was even a park. He said they were the stewards of the land and knew all its secrets. "Secrets?" I asked, getting curious. He gave me this intense look and said, "The land remembers. It has its own memory and its own spirits. There are more things out here than just man and animals." Okay, that was kind of spooky. I wasn't sure if he was serious or just messing with me, but it definitely added to the whole creepy vibe of the place. That night, back at the station, I couldn't shake this feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to have eyes, and I kept hearing whispers in the wind. I told Earl about it, and he just laughed it off. "First week jitters," he said. "Don't let the forest get to you, and don't listen to any of Daniel's superstitions." Easy for him to say, right? He wasn't the one sleeping in a cabin in the middle of nowhere with a guy who talked about spirits and stuff. A few days later, I was on patrol by myself. The weather was gloomy, and the forest was even creepier than usual. It was like all the animals had decided to take the day off or something. It was dead quiet. Then I stumbled across this clearing, and that's when I saw it. The deer, or what was left of it. It was mangled, like something had ripped it apart, and the bite marks, they were huge, way bigger than anything I'd ever seen before. I checked the tracks, and they were unlike anything I recognized. They were massive, with these long, claw-like toes. I felt sick to my stomach. I radioed Earl, trying to keep my voice steady. "I found something. It's not right." He told me to head back to the station immediately. As I was turning to leave, I saw something move in the trees. It was just a flash, but it was enough to make my heart jump into my throat. I practically sprinted back to the station. Earl was waiting for me, and we went back to the clearing together. He looked at the carcass, the tracks, and even he seemed a little shaken. "Could be a bear," he said, but I could tell he didn't really believe it. Just then Daniel showed up. He took one look at the tracks and said, "That's no bear, that's something else." Earl and Daniel exchanged this weird look, like they knew something I didn't. I was about to ask what the heck was going on when Daniel said we should head back because it was getting dark. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those tracks, about the feeling of being watched. And I knew that whatever was out there in the woods, it wasn't anything I wanted to meet. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was going on. So I found Daniel sitting by the fire, and I just blurted out, "What's really out there?" He looked at me with this serious expression, and then he said, "You ever heard of the Wendigo?" Okay, yeah, I'd heard of it. It's like this creepy Native American legend about a cannibalistic spirit that lives in the woods. But I always thought it was just a story, you know? Daniel told me it was more than just a story. He said the Wendigo was real, and it was hungry. And once it set its sights on you, it wouldn't stop until it had you. I felt a chill run down my spine. "So, you're saying that's what killed the deer?" He nodded. "It's fast, faster than anything natural, and it can mimic voices, lure people into the woods. Great, just great. Not only was I dealing with a monster, but it could also sound like my friends." This was officially a nightmare. The next morning, Earl was all business. "Full patrol," he said. "We need to find this thing." We split up, each taking a different section of the forest. I was terrified, but I tried to act tough. I kept my gun close and my eyes peeled for any sign of the Wendigo. The forest was dead silent. No birds, no animals, nothing. Just the wind whistling through the trees. I felt like I was being watched, like something was stalking me from the shadows. Then I heard it, a low growl, deep and guttural. It sent shivers down my spine. I spun around, searching for the source of the sound, but I couldn't see anything. Then I heard it again, closer this time, and then I saw it. It was a shadow at first, moving between the trees, but as it got closer, I could see it more clearly. It was tall and thin, with long limbs and glowing eyes. It was like something out of a horror movie. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear. Then I heard my name, Tom. It was Earl's voice. He was calling me from somewhere in the woods. I felt a surge of relief. He was here. I was safe. Tom, over here, he called again. I started to move towards the sound, but then I stopped. Something wasn't right. Earl's voice sounded off. There was an edge to it, a kind of desperation that didn't sound like him. Then I remembered what Daniel had said. It can mimic voices. Oh God, it wasn't Earl, it was the Wendigo. I turned and ran in the opposite direction. I didn't stop running until I reached the clearing. I collapsed on the ground, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my ears. When I looked back, the Wendigo was gone, but I knew it was still out there, somewhere in the woods, waiting for me to make a mistake. I stumbled back to the station, completely rattled. Earl and Daniel were already there, and they could see I was a mess. I told them about the encounter, about the Wendigo mimicking Earl's voice. Earl was pissed. That thing tried to trick you, he growled. It's playing games with us. Daniel just nodded grimly. It's testing us, trying to find our weaknesses. We knew we had to do something, but what? We were outmatched, outgunned, and out of our minds with fear. Then Daniel suggested something crazy. He said we should try to trap the Wendigo. He said it was afraid of fire, and if we could lure it into a pit and set it ablaze, we might be able to kill it. It sounded insane, but we were desperate. So we spent the next few days setting up this elaborate trap in a ravine deep in the forest. We dug a pit, filled it with kindling, and basically hoped for the best. The night we set the trap, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. We waited in the darkness, listening for any sign of the Wendigo. And then we saw it. It emerged from the trees, this horrifying creature with glowing eyes and razor-sharp claws. It was even more terrifying in person. We held our breath as it approached the trap. It was almost close enough. And then Earl lost it. He raised his rifle and started shooting. Earl, no, Daniel yelled. But it was too late. The Wendigo was too fast. It lunged at Earl, and in a blink of an eye he was gone, ripped apart. I was horrified. Daniel grabbed my arm and yelled, "Run!" We sprinted through the forest, the Wendigo hot on our heels. It was like something out of a nightmare. Then Daniel tripped and fell. "Go," he screamed. "Get to the station." I didn't want to leave him, but I knew I had no choice. I ran as fast as I could, the sound of Daniel's screams echoing in my ears. I made it back to the station and barricaded myself inside. I called for help on the radio, but I didn't know if anyone would come in time. The Wendigo was outside, scratching at the door, trying to get in. It mimicked Daniel's voice, begging me to let it in. But I knew better. Then it started breaking down the door. I grabbed Earl's rifle and prepared to fight. I knew I was probably going to die, but I wasn't going down without a fight. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I heard the sound of a helicopter in the distance. Rescue was coming. The Wendigo must have heard it too, because it suddenly disappeared. I collapsed on the floor, shaking and sobbing. I was alive. They took me to a new post after that, far away from Pine Creek, but I'll never forget what happened there. I'll never forget Earl and Daniel, and I'll never forget the Wendigo. It's out there, somewhere in the darkness, and it's still hungry. So my friends and I, we were kind of obsessed with all things spooky. Back in high school, we'd mess around with Ouija boards in cemeteries at night. You know, typical teenager stuff. But then we started getting braver, exploring abandoned buildings and places with creepy vibes. We were basically adrenaline junkies, always looking for the next scare. We never really found anything truly terrifying, though. Mostly just creepy atmospheres and that feeling of being watched. But that all changed after high school. We'd kind of drifted apart, some of us going to college, some starting families, the usual. But then my best friend Mike called me up out of the blue. He wanted to get the gang back together for a camping trip in a national park. Sounded cool, right? Except Mike being Mike, he picked the park specifically because tons of people go missing there every year. Yeah, that kind of threw me off. We were all about spooky adventures, but this was different. This was a place where people vanished for real, not just some old house with creaky floorboards. But Mike, smooth talker that he is, convinced me it would be fine. He said a bunch of our friends were experienced campers and we'd be safe. Against my better judgment, I agreed. 2 days later, I was driving to the park to meet up with everyone. And let me tell you, the place was stunning. Seriously beautiful, like something out of a postcard. But then I saw the bulletin board near the parking lot. It was plastered with missing person posters. Yikes. As we were unloading our gear, this park ranger came over. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. He welcomed us, but then he got this serious look on his face. "Folks," he said, "I know you've seen the posters. People go missing here. A lot of people. If you're going camping, stick to the trails. Don't go wandering off. If you get lost out here," he trailed off, shaking his head. "Well, let's just say we don't have a great track record of finding people." He didn't stick around for a response, just gave us that warning and went back to whatever he was doing. We all kind of looked at each other like, okay, maybe this wasn't such a good idea. But we were already there, so we decided to press on. We hiked for a few miles, looking for a good campsite. I was a little nervous about being so far from the cars, but Mike and his buddy Alex had brought hunting rifles, so I figured we were safe enough. We found a clearing and set up camp. By nightfall, we had a roaring campfire going and were sharing some beers, telling stories and reminiscing about the old days. It was actually pretty nice, for a while. Then, around midnight, Mike had one of his brilliant ideas. "Hey," he said, grinning, "we should go look for some of those missing people. Imagine finding their bones." Now, nobody was that drunk. We all told him he was crazy, but Mike and Alex were determined. They grabbed their rifles along with Mike's girlfriend Brenda and headed off into the dark woods. As they disappeared into the trees, I remembered the ranger's warning, "Stick to the trails." They were definitely not sticking to the trails. I had a bad feeling about this. Hours passed, and there was no sign of Mike, Alex, and Brenda. We tried calling their phones, but no signal. Of course, way out here in the boonies, who would expect decent cell service, right? We were starting to get seriously worried. "Should we go look for them?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I said, feeling a knot in my stomach. The ranger said to stay on the trails, but what if they're hurt? Emily chimed in. We can't just leave them out here. We argued back and forth for a while, but in the end we decided to head back to the visitor center and get help. Even if the ranger wasn't thrilled about it, he was our best shot at finding our friends. We packed up some flashlights and the other rifle Alex had left behind and started heading back the way we came. The woods were eerily quiet. No crickets chirping, no owls hooting, just the sound of our own footsteps crunching on the leaves. Then we heard it. A scream. Help. It was Mike's voice, no doubt about it. Help me. We took off running towards the sound, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. We were so focused on finding Mike that we didn't even realize we were veering off the trail. We found a broken flashlight on the ground, flickering weakly. Then we heard Mike again, closer this time. Help me, he whimpered. But something was off. His voice sounded weird, almost like someone was trying to imitate him. Mike, is that you? I called out. Are you hurt? Yes, come help. The voice was faint, raspy. We crept closer, our flashlights illuminating the trees. And then we saw him. Mike was kneeling on the ground, his head slumped forward, his shirt covered in blood. He looked dead. They were so damn tasty, the voice rasped. We froze. Mike's head snapped up, his eyes rolled back in his head. His jaw moved, but it wasn't Mike speaking. It was like something was controlling him, like a puppet. And then we saw it. This thing. It stepped out from behind Mike's body. It was tall and grotesque, with long limbs and sharp claws. It had Mike's blood smeared on its face, and its eyes glowed in the darkness. Before we could even react, it lunged at us. Josh, who was carrying the rifle, fired a shot, but it missed. The creature slammed into us, knocking Amber and me to the ground. It went straight for Josh, its claws tearing into him. Amber screamed, and I saw that her leg was twisted at an unnatural angle. She was hurt. I helped her up, and we scrambled away as fast as we could, the creature's growls echoing behind us. We didn't get far. The creature caught up to us, knocking us both to the ground. It grabbed Amber and dragged her off into the darkness, her screams fading into the night. I was alone. I scrambled to my feet and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back. I just ran and ran, the sounds of the creature's pursuit fading behind me. Then the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I tumbled through the darkness, the air rushing past me. It felt like I was falling forever. Then, with a sickening thud, I landed on something hard and soft and squishy. I fumbled for my flashlight, but it was gone. I was surrounded by pitch blackness. The only sound, the buzzing of flies and the pounding of my own heart. The stench of death filled my nostrils, thick and overpowering. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized with horror what I had fallen into. A pit filled with bodies. They were everywhere, piled on top of each other, mangled and decaying, limbs twisted at unnatural angles, faces frozen in expressions of terror. I recognized some of them. Amber, Alex, even the park ranger. I choked back a sob, bile rising in my throat. I had to get out of there. I had to escape. I started crawling over the bodies, trying not to gag at the putrid smell and the feel of cold, clammy flesh beneath my hands. My foot got stuck in something soft, and I cried out as I realized it was Mike's body. His stomach ripped open. I pulled my foot free and kept crawling, the darkness pressing down on me, the buzzing of flies a constant reminder of the carnage around me. I had to get out. I had to. Finally, I saw a glimmer of light above me. I scrambled towards it, my fingers digging into the dirt, my lungs burning. I pulled myself out of the pit and collapsed on the ground, gasping for air. I had escaped, but at what cost? My friends were gone, their bodies rotting in that gruesome pit, and the creature, that thing, was still out there. I stumbled back to the trail, my body aching, my mind numb. I walked for hours, the sun slowly rising in the sky. Finally, I reached the visitor center. My car was still there, waiting for me. I got in and just sat there for a while, staring blankly ahead. I couldn't believe what had happened. It felt like a nightmare, but I knew it was real. I started the car and drove away. The image of the mass grave burned into my mind. As I drove, I saw another car heading towards the park. A family, a man, a woman, and 2 young children. I should have stopped them. I should have warned them. But I didn't. I just kept driving, the guilt and horror weighing heavily on my heart. I never went on another spooky adventure again. The experience had changed me, scarred me in a way I couldn't explain. I still have nightmares about that night, about the creature, about the pit of bodies. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I can hear the whispers of my friends, their voices calling out to me from the grave. I drove for hours, the highway stretching out before me like an endless ribbon. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get away from that park, from the memories, from the horror. Eventually, I found myself in a small town, a sleepy little place with a diner and a gas station. I pulled over, my body exhausted, my mind still reeling. I went into the diner and ordered a coffee, my hands shaking as I reached for the mug. The waitress, a kind-faced woman with a warm smile, asked if I was okay. I just nodded, unable to speak. I sat there for a long time, sipping my coffee, trying to process everything that had happened. My friends were gone. Mike, Alex, Brenda, Josh, Emily, Amber, all gone. And it was my fault. If I hadn't agreed to that stupid camping trip, they would still be alive. The guilt was crushing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was responsible for their deaths. I should have listened to the ranger. I should have stopped Mike from going into the woods. I should have done something, anything, to prevent this tragedy. But it was too late. They were gone, and I was left to deal with the aftermath, the memories, the nightmares. I finished my coffee and left the diner, the warm sunlight a stark contrast to the darkness that had consumed me the night before. I got back in my car and continued driving, the road stretching out before me like an uncertain future. I didn't know where I was going or what I would do with my life. But I knew one thing: I would never forget my friends. I would carry their memory with me, a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that lurks in the shadows. I eventually made my way back home, a shell of my former self. I told my family and friends that my friends had died in a hiking accident. I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. They wouldn't understand. They would think I was crazy. I tried to move on with my life, but it wasn't easy. The memories haunted me. The nightmares plagued my sleep. I couldn't escape the guilt, the grief, the horror. I sought therapy, hoping it would help. And it did to some extent, but the scars remained. I would never be the same. I still think about my friends often. I wonder what they would be doing now if they were still alive. I imagine their laughter, their smiles, their voices, and I feel a pang of sadness, a deep ache in my heart. I will never forget them. And I will never forget the creature in the woods, the creature that took them from me. It is a reminder that there are things in this world that we cannot understand, things that defy explanation, things that can shatter our lives in an instant. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I can still hear their screams. I'd just gotten a call about screams coming from deep in the forest, off one of the popular trails. This wasn't unusual. If you've ever heard a mountain lion, you know it sounds a lot like a woman screaming. So, I was about to head out when my chief asked to come along. I thought it was a little weird. The job seemed too small for him. But I figured maybe he wanted to check up on me since I was new. We set off, making small talk. I was trying to make a good impression, you know? We were joking around, and he said something about taking even the small jobs seriously, because you never know what you'll find. Turns out that was some of the best advice I ever got, because I learned my lesson the hard way by not listening to it later on, but that's a different story. Anyway, we got to the area where the call came from and started heading north on the trail. We could hear the screams, and it did sound like a mountain lion, but something about it just felt off. We kept walking toward the sound. About 10 minutes in, it was like someone hit the mute button on the forest. Dead silent. I couldn't even hear myself breathing. I thought maybe I'd gone deaf, but I looked at my chief, and he had the same nervous look on his face that I did. It was like he'd dealt with something like this before, which, now I know, he had. Just as suddenly as the silence came, I started hearing this low buzzing, but it wasn't just in my ears. I could feel it in my whole body, like I was getting my teeth drilled at the dentist, only way worse. My vision started to vibrate, and then I swear I saw this black figure, like 7 feet tall, step out from behind some trees. It let out that same scream and started crawling towards us. I freaked out, obviously. I started to run, but my chief grabbed my arm hard. He pulled me close and held my arms tight, and then he started walking me out of the forest. I was about to tell him to run, but he said in this really calm voice, "Don't run, don't talk, don't look back, just keep walking." And I did exactly what he said. He knew something I didn't, and as much as I wanted to run, I didn't want to risk it. That 10-minute walk was the longest of my life. I could feel that thing crawling behind us. I could hear the buzzing and the screaming, and I wanted to run so bad, but I didn't. Eventually, the noise in the forest came back, and the buzzing stopped. I think it ran off. We got back to the trail, and I was shaking. I was in so much shock I couldn't even cry. My chief just started walking back to the main base like nothing had happened. I started yelling at him, asking what the hell that was. And he said, and I remember this word for word, "There are things in these woods that have been here longer than us, things we can't explain or get rid of. If you don't think you can handle that, you should pack your bags now." He kept walking, and I followed, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. I stayed on the job, though. When it was good, it was really good. I met some amazing people, and I loved being in nature, but in the end, the bad experiences outweighed the good, and I had to leave. Honestly, I wish I had left when he told me to pack my bags. I know this experience doesn't sound that scary, but trust me, there are worse ones. Living through it was definitely scarier than reading about it. This first encounter wasn't enough to scare me off, but the ones that came later, those led to me leaving the job. Some were scarier, some were more explainable. I'd love to hear other people's experiences in the woods too. It seems like everyone who spends enough time out there has at least one creepy story. Anyway, here's another one of mine. We were doing a search for a young girl who had wandered off. We found her. She's fine. The team was spread out pretty far, so I was walking by myself, but within shouting distance of the others. As I was walking, I found a set of stairs. They kind of looked like they belonged there, but also not. They were overgrown, like the steps up to someone's house, but there was no way someone could have built them there. It was like those weird stairs my coworkers had talked about finding sometimes. I thought I'd be terrified if I ever came across a pair, but I wasn't. Actually, I felt this weird urge to walk up them, like something was pulling me towards them. Maybe it was the excitement of finding something strange, or maybe it was something darker, I don't know. Luckily, someone called out that they'd found something, and it snapped me back to reality. I'm really glad they did, because I'm not sure what I would have done otherwise. We found the girl, and everything was fine. But on the way back, I told one of my partners that I'd seen some stairs. She looked at me, concerned, and practically interrogated me about whether I'd touched them or walked up them. I said no, and that was it. So yeah, pretty tame. Nothing too intense. I wish I had more to say about them, but I'm not going to lie or exaggerate anything. This next one isn't about stairs, but it is about a ladder, which is pretty similar, I guess. This happened sometime during my first year as a national park ranger. It was the start of summer, and poison ivy was going crazy, so we had to do weekly checks on the trails. My partner and I got sent to check some of the less popular ones. We got to this one spot where the trail split for a few minutes and then joined back up again. We could still see each other through the bushes, so we decided to split up and meet back at the end. No big deal, right? He took the left path, and I took the right. I was walking along, looking for poison ivy, when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. There was this big clearing in the trees, perfectly round, like someone had been taking care of it. No trees, no bushes, not even weeds. I was so focused on the ground that I almost didn't see the giant ladder standing right in the middle of the circle. I can't explain this, but the ladder was standing upright, leaning against nothing. It was like some invisible force was holding it up. I looked all the way up, and there was a man standing on top, wearing a business suit. It was the weirdest thing. He looked like he'd just walked out of an office building. His head was tilted back, and his mouth was open. I called up to him a few times, but he didn't respond. I walked around the ladder, trying to find some strings or something, thinking it might be a prank, but there was nothing. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't see my partner, so I radioed him to come over. But while I was waiting, I did something stupid. I decided to touch the ladder. I know. Don't touch weird stuff you find in the woods. But I was still new and naive. I got this weird feeling as I reached out, but I ignored it and touched the ladder. The man at the top suddenly snapped his neck down to look at me and let out this awful gasp, like he was taking his last breath. His expression was still surprised, but it was like his eyelids and lips had been pulled back. It was freaky. I jumped back and grabbed my taser. I heard something behind me and turned around, ready to tase whoever was there, but it was just my partner. I looked back at the circle, and the ladder was on the ground. The man was gone. My partner asked what was going on, and I explained everything. He didn't think I was crazy, though. He knew weird stuff happened in the woods all the time. We looked for the guy, but we didn't find him. I never saw anything like that again, and neither has anyone I've talked to. I mean, this guy was balancing on top of a ladder that wasn't leaning against anything. Who knows? Maybe I met Houdini or something. When you see things like this, you have to make jokes about it, or you won't be able to move past it. I'm glad people are enjoying my stories. I don't know when I'll write more, though. It's kind of tiring, but also pretty cathartic. I'm thinking of sharing some of the less spooky stories, too, and some that are just about humans being, well, humans. I've had a lot of weird experiences in the woods. Some are scarier than others, some are more explainable. But they all left me with this feeling that there's more out there than we understand. Things we can't see, things we can't explain. I guess that's why I became a ranger in the first place. I wanted to explore the unknown, to see things that most people never get to see. But I also learned that some things are better left undisturbed. I'm not sure what I believe anymore. Are there really creatures lurking in the shadows? Are there portals to other dimensions hidden in the woods? I don't know. But I do know that I've seen things I can't explain. Maybe someday I'll have answers. But for now, I'm just sharing my stories, hoping that someone out there might understand. Or maybe just be entertained. Either way, it's good to get it off my chest. And if you have any weird experiences of your own, I'd love to hear them. Maybe we can figure this out together. But whatever you do, be careful out there. And don't touch anything you don't recognize. You never know what you might unleash. I've been a park ranger for almost 25 years, and let me tell you, things have changed a lot. Back in the day, it was all about keeping the peace and making sure nobody got eaten by a bear. Now, it's like we're fighting a goddamn war out there. This one time, I was working at this park. Can't say exactly where, you know how it is. And we had this system where we'd rotate the campsites every year. Gave the land a break. Let the trees and stuff grow back. Winter had just ended, and I was out checking which spots were good to go for the summer. Winters there were brutal, so I wasn't expecting much action. Besides the occasional hardcore survivalist or some Boy Scout troop led by a guy who thinks he's Rambo, nobody camped in the cold. The first campsite was clear, no problems. But as I'm heading to the next one, I spot something down in a valley. Looked like a pile of trash. Great. I thought, another bunch of jerks setting up camp where they shouldn't. Usually means I get to clean up their beer cans and put out their half-assed fires. I get closer, and it's way worse than I thought. It's like a bomb went off. Gear everywhere, tents ripped to shreds, and blood. Tons of it. My heart damn near stopped. There were these huge pools of blood and drag marks leading off into the bushes. Nope, nope, nope. I pulled out my radio, then my Glock. I'm a certified law enforcement officer, but I hadn't had to use my gun in years. I scanned the area, hoping to God I didn't see any movement, then called for backup. The wait was the worst part. Dead silence. And I mean dead. You know how animals go quiet when they sense danger? Yeah, that's what it was like. Every hair on my neck was standing up. I crept forward, gun ready. A smashed cooler, a tent that looked like it got attacked by a bear on steroids, more blood. Somebody or something had gone to town on this place. I'd seen bears tear through campsites before, and even those wild hogs we had, but this was different. This was savage. Finally, backup arrived. They sent me back to HQ, even brought medics, like they were gonna find anyone alive after that mess. One of the new guys actually puked when he saw it. I couldn't blame him. I was just glad to get the hell out of there. HQ was buzzing. We only had 4 people working there, but the phones were ringing off the hook. The printer was spitting out paper like crazy, and the whole place felt like it was wired on Red Bull. The manager, he sees me and waves me into his office. Now, this guy was usually pretty chill, but he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Pale, eyes all bloodshot. He locks the door, which he never does, and asks me what I saw. I tell him everything, and he just gets paler. His hands were shaking. Then this long, awkward silence. I'm expecting a million questions, but he doesn't ask a single one. Just lets me go. I hear the lock click as I leave. A few minutes later, he's on the phone having this hushed conversation with someone. I never saw that manager again. Next thing I know, we have a new boss. This guy was all business, a real crisis management type. First thing he does, orders a controlled burn of that whole area. I wasn't about to argue. I watched the smoke rise and hoped that was the end of it. Nope. New orders. Move the campsites closer to HQ. But first, we gotta check the new spots with trail cameras. Make sure we're not setting up shop in some animal's living room. We even put a few cameras along the hog trails just in case. A couple of days later, we collect the footage. The new manager takes it all and holds up in his office. Hours go by, then suddenly he loses his shit. Screaming, yelling, cursing, a blue streak on the phone. He spends the rest of the day and the whole night in there, calling in all kinds of experts and whatnot. Next morning we have a meeting. Manager looks like he hasn't slept a wink. Big changes are coming, he says. We're talking massive lampposts around the park border, floodlights around the ranger station, the whole 9 yards. Campsites have to be moved even closer in, where the light can reach them. I'm like, dude, what's the point of camping if you're practically in the parking lot? He tells me to shut it, says this is just the beginning. The park now closes at sundown, no exceptions. And get this, we're all required to carry long guns at all times. Now, it's not unusual for rangers to carry AR-15s or shotguns in the backcountry. You got bears, mountain lions, and those damn pot growers. And those guys aren't your friendly neighborhood hippies. We're talking serious criminals, armed to the teeth, who'll shoot you as soon as look at you. But this was different. This felt excessive. I got stuck with the overnight shift. Manager says there'll be more new protocols when I get back. Great, just great. Overnights used to be pretty chill. Monitor the radios, break up the occasional party, make sure the forest wasn't on fire. But this time I clock in and head to the gun cage, and holy crap. Our shotguns had new rifled barrels, meant for firing slugs. That's the kind of firepower you use to stop a charging rhino, not for dealing with drunk teenagers. The AR-15s were upgraded too, with bigger magazines and hollow point rounds. Hollow points, in the woods, those things are designed to cause maximum damage, and they go haywire if they hit a twig. It made no sense. We weren't a SWAT team, for crying out loud. Next to the radio, there were new instructions. We weren't allowed to respond to emergency calls directly anymore. We had to relay everything to this new phone number, some mysterious hotline. Time crawled by. I wasn't even allowed to leave the building until sunrise. And those floodlights, they were so damn bright I felt like I was working on the surface of the sun. A few nights passed, nothing happened. Then, one night, a car pulls up with a bunch of kids. Backpacks, tents, the whole deal. I knew they were heading for an unauthorized campsite. No one had booked anything that night. Sun goes down, they're still not back. I call the manager and he tells me to call the hotline. This gruff voice answers, asks me the usual questions. Bunch of kids at an unauthorized site, I tell him. Should I go break it up? I can see their campfire from here. No, he says. Do not leave the building. Do not attempt communication, that is all. Report any developments. Weird. Daybreak comes, the manager shows up early. Have you seen them? Did they leave? Nope, car's still there. Probably nursing hangovers, I say. He starts cursing up a storm, then goes inside to make a call. I'm watching the ridge when he comes back out. He's got an AR-15 in one hand, another strapped to his back, a Glock on his hip, and a jerry can of gasoline. He's marching straight towards his car. What the hell are you doing? I yell, but he ignores me. I try to follow him, but something tells me that's a bad idea. I go back inside and call the hotline. Same gruff voice, same questions. The manager just went up to that campsite, I say, armed to the teeth, and he's carrying gasoline. What the hell do I do? Stay there. Do not interfere. Backup is inbound. Report any developments. Just then I see smoke rising from the ridge. 2 vans come screeching into the parking lot. A dozen guys pile out, all decked out in tactical gear. I go outside. Who are you guys? What's going on? They're all lined up, military style. One of them, the leader I guess, says, "Which direction did he go?" "Up there." I point to the smoke. They take off running up the ridge, guns cocked. I try to call after them, but they don't even look back. On the side of their vans it says DOI Response Team. Never heard of them. Half an hour later they come back, dragging the manager with them. He's tied up and yelling, "I did what needed to be done. Trust me, it's worse than they thought. We can't stop this. Burn it all." They throw him in the back one of a van and sedate him. The leader comes over to me, and I swear I almost pee my pants. "I need to see the office," he says. "All computers, hard drives, everything." He mentioned videotapes. I need those too. They tear the place apart. Computers, reports, everything gets taken. The leader personally bags up the videotapes. He looks at the gun cage and scoffs. "Cute, you're out of your league." Finally, they're done. "Call the number," the leader says. "Tell them it's contained. You need a new superior. And don't talk about this to anyone." They leave, and right on cue, the fire trucks and news vans show up. The official story is that there was a wildfire, and some campers might be missing. Rumors fly around, but they die down after a while. The new manager is good at handling the press. With no campers and even shorter hours, things were pretty quiet. We rebuilt the ranger station and set up the new campsites, practically within spitting distance of HQ. Then, out of the blue, the new manager tells us to set up cameras around the station and campsites. Usually there's so much human activity that all you catch are raccoons and the occasional lost bear, but we humor him. A couple of days later, we collect the footage. I'm playing cards with one of the rookies while the manager watches hours of nothing. Just an empty, brightly lit parking lot. Then he gets to the footage around the station, and that's when the screaming starts. We rush into his office, and he's stomping on the hard drives, babbling about how they lied to him, how it wasn't clean, how he wasn't prepared. He yells at us to get out. Later, he makes a call. The rookie eavesdrops and tells me the manager's demanding a transfer, something about them not doing their jobs properly. Then the phone clicks, and the manager starts sobbing. Hours later, he comes out of the office looking like a beaten man. We cut our hours even further, practically open on weekends only. Campers have to check in to the closest campsites, no exceptions. And we're not allowed to leave the station after dark no matter what. In an emergency, we're not to call 911, just that damn hotline. We draw straws for overnight shifts. Why we even need to stay overnight if we can't do anything is beyond me. I asked the manager, and he just says it's protocol, that someone needs to be there to report any irregularities. My turn for the overnight shift comes. I pace around with my shotgun, staring into the blinding floodlights, trying to see what's out there. I hear crickets, and it actually calms me down. Prey stays quiet when predators are around, right? It's a long, tense night. The next night, it's the manager's turn. He brings this insanely bright tactical flashlight, says he's afraid of the dark. He's not. He's afraid of what's in the dark. At 3 a.m., my phone rings. It's him. Get over here now and bring guns. What? You have a whole armory in there. Now. Oh God, I screwed up. I think they're attracted to the light. I called the number, and all they said was backup would be here in the morning. OFK, FK, goddamn. I hear gunshots, then a pause. More gunshots. Screaming, scuffling. The line goes dead. I call the hotline. A new voice answers, just as gruff as the others. Look, I work at Park Name. I just got off the phone with manager's name. I just spoke with manager's name. What can you report? Something bad happened. Gunshots. He said he thought they were attracted to the light. Interesting. Thank you for your report. The park is now closed. You will be reassigned. Goodbye. Click. Officially, the park was closed for a controlled burn. Nothing in the report about what happened to the manager. The public just thought it was some bureaucratic shakeup. Nobody asked questions. I got transferred to a new park, halfway across the country. Beautiful place, but they have some weird rules here too. Don't go out after dark, and don't carry a flashlight. I'm worried. Why no flashlight? They won't tell me. Be safe out there, everyone. Okay, so ever since I was a kid, I was obsessed with national parks. Like, seriously obsessed. I dreamed of being a park ranger, hanging out in nature, helping campers, you know, the whole shebang. Being out in the wilderness was my happy place. Whenever life got crazy, I'd hit the trails or disappear into the woods for a few days. It was my way of recharging. My parents, not so thrilled about my career aspirations. They were all about the whole doctor thing, or maybe a lawyer, something respectable. But nope, all I wanted was to be surrounded by trees. Go figure. Anyway, after high school, I started applying for park ranger jobs like crazy. Local parks, state parks, national parks, you name it, I applied. I even called a few places, just to show how eager I was. No luck. Nada. Meanwhile, my bank account was looking sad. My trusty '03 Civic was starting to fall apart, and I was living on a shoestring budget. Gas station ramen, skipped meals, the whole 9 yards. It wasn't exactly the glamorous post-graduation life I'd envisioned. See, my parents had kicked me out when they found out I was gay, so I was basically homeless for a while, crashing on my friend Dylan's couch. It was tough, but I kept telling myself things would get better. And hey, at least I was saving money on rent, right? I spent most of my time exploring California in my Civic, beaches, mountains, deserts. Sleeping in my car wasn't ideal, but it was cheaper than a hotel. One day, I was checking my bank account, spoiler alert. It was practically empty, and I saw an email that made me do a double take. National Park Service, immediately hiring full-time ranger, must be willing to relocate. Base salary $65,000. Respond for info. 1. Yes please. 65,000? That was like winning the lottery to me. I fired off an email faster than you could say Smokey the Bear. I attached my resume, which I'd basically supercharged with every wilderness skill I could think of. I was not about to let this opportunity slip away. And guess what? They wanted to interview me. A tele-interview, but still. I was so excited I could barely focus at my burger flipping job. My manager kept yelling at me in Spanish, but I didn't even care. This was it. My chance to escape. The interview went great until the interviewer, Abigail, asked me this really weird question. Are you afraid of what lurks in the shadows of the trees at night, Jake? What? I was totally thrown. I mean, I wasn't afraid of the dark or anything, but that question definitely creeped me out. I mumbled something about never having any problems in the wilderness, and she just gave me this cryptic response. I reckon you should be, honey. She's always watching, even if it feels like she left. No matter how far you go, she'll always be a few steps behind you. She's always smiling, too. If you dare ignore, too. And then she just stopped, like someone interrupted her. I was like, okay. But then she came back and told me I got the job. I was going to Alaska, Denali National Park, in 3 days. I was ecstatic, but I also couldn't shake that weird comment about someone watching me. I tried to ask her about it, but she just brushed it off as a wonky brain moment. Whatever. I was going to Alaska. Who cared about some creepy comment? I was about to live my dream. The day of the flight finally arrived, and I was practically bouncing off the walls. Dylan, my couch-providing savior, helped me pack my meager belongings and drove me to the airport. I gave him the rest of my cash, which wasn't much, and said goodbye to my crappy apartment and even crappier job. At the airport, I felt like a kid on Christmas morning. I had my backpack stuffed with all my essentials, my trusty hiking gear, a beat-up camera, my laptop, and a few notebooks. I was ready for adventure. The flight was a blur. I spent most of it staring out the window, daydreaming about the Alaskan wilderness. When we finally landed in Anchorage, I was practically vibrating with excitement. Abigail was there to greet me, along with another ranger named Zeke. He was this big, muscular dude who looked like he could wrestle a bear. They were both pretty quiet, and I got the feeling that Zeke was sizing me up. Stepping out of the airport was like entering another world. The air was crisp and clean, the mountains were massive, and the trees were unlike anything I'd ever seen before. I felt like I'd landed on another planet. We piled into a van and started the long drive to Denali. Zeke was pretty quiet at first, but eventually we started talking. Turns out he'd also been kicked out of his house, though he wouldn't say why. He grew up near Glacier National Park and had been working as a ranger for about a year. I liked Zeke, but there was something a little off about him. He seemed kind of nervous, like he was hiding something. But hey, everyone has their secrets, right? As we got closer to Denali, Zeke dropped a bombshell. I wasn't going to be stationed at the main ranger station. Instead, I was going to be in a fire lookout tower, miles away from anyone else. It's pretty isolated, he said, with a slightly worried look. Make sure you read the handbook. The last guy who didn't, well, let's just say they had to replace him. Okay, that was a little unsettling, but I figured, how hard could it be? Just watch for fires and hike around a bit, right? We finally reached the ranger station, and it was even more impressive in person. It was this cozy wooden building with lights glowing in the windows. But I wasn't staying there. Zeke pointed towards the forest. Your tower's about 5 miles north of here, he said. Everything you need should be there. And seriously, read the handbook. With that, he hopped out of the van and disappeared inside the station. I was on my own. The van driver continued down this bumpy dirt road, deeper and deeper into the forest. I was starting to get a little nervous, but also super excited. This was it. My own little slice of wilderness paradise. We finally reached a clearing, and there it was, my tower. It was this tall metal structure with a cabin on top, rising above the trees. The driver let me out and pointed towards a trail. About a quarter-mile walk, he said. Good luck, kid. And with that, he drove away, leaving me alone in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness. No turning back now. I hiked through the woods towards the tower, my backpack feeling heavier with every step. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees, and I couldn't shake this feeling that I was being watched. But hey, maybe it was just the whole alone in the wilderness thing getting to me. The tower was even cooler up close. It was probably 80 feet tall, with this metal staircase spiraling around it. As I climbed to the top, I was blown away by the view. Trees stretched out in every direction, mountains loomed in the distance, and there was even a small lake shimmering in the moonlight. It was breathtaking. The cabin on top was small but cozy. There was a bed, a desk, a locker, and windows on 3 sides. Posters of Alaskan parks and wildlife decorated the walls, and there was a handbook sitting on the desk, along with a weird old phone connected to a landline. I grabbed the handbook and started reading. It was mostly basic stuff. My duties, how to handle emergencies, info about the local plants and animals. But then I came across this map showing all the lookout towers in the park. Mine was way out there, practically in the middle of nowhere. Just as I was about to put the handbook down, I noticed a memo pad next to it. On the cover it said, "5 most important things," in big, bold letters. I figured it was probably just some notes from the previous ranger, but curiosity got the better of me. I flipped it open, and the first page sent chills down my spine. 1. You work alone. Okay, that was a little creepy, but I figured it was just stating the obvious. I turned the page. 2. She will not help you. She? Who was she? I flipped to the next page. 3. If you hear her crying, run. Okay, now I was officially freaked out. I quickly turned to the next page. 4. If you see her, it's too late. I slammed the memo pad shut and started pacing around the cabin. What the heck was going on? Who was this she? And why was I supposed to run if I heard her crying? This was definitely not in the job description. I tried to calm down, telling myself it was probably just some old ranger legend or something. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to sleep with my utility belt on, just in case. Better safe than sorry, right? I tossed and turned for what felt like hours, my mind racing with all sorts of crazy scenarios. Finally, I drifted off to sleep, but my dreams were filled with shadowy figures and eerie cries. I woke up to the sound of rain pounding on the roof. Great, just great. I couldn't even go for a walk to clear my head. I looked out the window, and a thick fog had rolled in, obscuring everything. I felt completely isolated. I was about to try to find a phone number for the ranger station when I saw someone climbing the stairs to my tower. I instinctively reached for my gun, but then I saw her face in the window. It was a young woman, maybe a little older than me, wearing a ranger uniform. She had a friendly smile and introduced herself as Autumn. "Just wanted to say hi to the new guy," she said. "I usually work at headquarters, but sometimes I help out the new recruits. Maybe I can give you a tour when the weather clears up." She was soaking wet, and I felt bad for her having to hike all the way out here in the rain. I invited her in, and we started chatting. She told me the phones didn't work anymore, and that they were just for decoration. Great, just what I needed to know. Then she mentioned that headquarters wanted me to check out a trail where a boulder had fallen and blocked the path. It was called the Boulder Ridge Loop, and it was west of my tower. "I'd be happy to tag along if you want," she offered. "It might be tough to find the trailhead on your first day." I was about to say yes when I remembered the memo pad. "You work alone. She will not help you." Suddenly, I wasn't so sure about Autumn anymore. Was she the she from the memo pad? Was this some kind of test? I told her I needed to get changed, and she said she'd wait for me at the trailhead. As soon as she left, I grabbed the memo pad and reread the entries. My heart started pounding. I spent the next few hours pacing around the cabin, trying to decide what to do. Should I go with Autumn, or should I stay put and risk getting in trouble with headquarters? The rain finally started to let up, and I knew I had to make a decision. I grabbed my gear and headed for the door, my gut churning with anxiety. This was definitely not how I'd imagined my first day on the job. I crept towards the door, my heart pounding like a drum solo. I peeked through the window, and there she was, Autumn, standing at the base of the tower, staring up at me with this creepy, unblinking smile. It wasn't the friendly smile from before. This smile was predatory. Then I heard it. The crying. It was this high-pitched wail, like nails on a chalkboard, and it was coming from Autumn. It was so loud, so piercing, it made my head spin. If you hear her crying, run, the memo pad had warned. I didn't hesitate. I threw open the door and sprinted down the stairs, my boots clanging on the metal. But as I ran, I saw Autumn's eyes lock onto me. They were completely white, and her smile widened. Blood started pouring from her eyes, and her hair started falling out in clumps. If she sees you, it's too late. Panic surged through me. I whipped out my rifle and fired, hitting her square in the chest. She crumpled to the ground, blood pooling around her. I didn't stop to check if she was really dead. I just ran back inside, slammed the door, and barricaded it with everything I could find. I collapsed against the wall, my body shaking. What the hell had just happened? Was Autumn even human? What was that thing? I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was over. I had survived. All I had to do was wait until morning, then get the hell out of there. But then I remembered the memo pad. There were 5 important things, not 4. I picked it up, my hands trembling. 1. You work alone. 2. She will not help you. 3. If you hear her crying, run. 4. If you see her, it's too late. I turned to the last page, my heart pounding in my chest. 5. Do not try to kill her under any condition. She does not die. As I read those words, I heard the familiar pounding of footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. And the wailing started again, louder than before. I looked out the window, and there she was. Autumn, climbing the stairs. Her eyes were glowing white. Her smile was wider than ever, and blood was streaming down her face. She was back. I screamed and scrambled away from the window, my mind reeling. She couldn't die. I had shot her, but she was still alive. What was she? The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear her raspy breathing, her gurgling cries. She was right outside the door. I grabbed the rifle, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I knew it was useless, but I had to try. I had to defend myself. The door burst open, and Autumn lunged at me, her claws outstretched. I fired, but the bullet passed right through her. She screamed and tackled me to the ground, her weight crushing me. I struggled, trying to push her off, but she was too strong. Her claws raked across my face, and I felt warm blood trickle down my cheek. Her breath was hot and fetid in my face, and her eyes burned into mine with an unholy light. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end, but it never came. Instead, I heard a voice, a deep, booming voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "She is mine," the voice said. "You cannot kill her. She is bound to me." I opened my eyes, and Autumn was gone. I was alone in the cabin, my heart pounding, my body trembling. The voice echoed in my head, sending chills down my spine. I didn't know what had happened, but I knew one thing. I had to get out of that tower. I had to get as far away from that creature as possible. I stumbled to my feet and grabbed my backpack. I didn't bother packing anything else. I just wanted to get out of there. I ran down the stairs, not stopping until I reached the clearing. I looked back at the tower, its silhouette dark against the moonlit sky. I could have sworn I saw a figure standing in the window watching me. I turned and ran into the forest, the darkness swallowing me whole. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to escape the creature and the voice that haunted my every step. I ran until I collapsed, exhausted and terrified. I didn't know if I would ever be safe, if I would ever escape the horrors of that night. But I knew one thing: I would never forget the creature in the tower, the creature that could not die. I hiked through the woods towards the tower, my backpack feeling heavier with every step. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees, and I couldn't shake this feeling that I was being watched. But hey, maybe it was just the whole alone in the wilderness thing getting to me. The tower was even cooler up close. It was probably 80 feet tall, with this metal staircase spiraling around it. As I climbed to the top, I was blown away by the view. Trees stretched out in every direction, mountains loomed in the distance, and there was even a small lake shimmering in the moonlight. It was breathtaking. The cabin on top was small but cozy. There was a bed, a desk, a locker, and windows on 3 sides. Posters of Alaskan parks and wildlife decorated the walls, and there was a handbook sitting on the desk, along with a weird old phone connected to a landline. I grabbed the handbook and started reading. It was mostly basic stuff: my duties, how to handle emergencies, info about the local plants and animals. But then I came across this map showing all the lookout towers in the park. Mine was way out there, practically in the middle of nowhere. Just as I was about to put the handbook down, I noticed a memo pad next to it. On the cover it said 5 most important things in big, bold letters. I figured it was probably just some notes from the previous ranger, but curiosity got the better of me. I flipped it open, and the first page sent chills down my spine. 1. You work alone. Okay, that was a little creepy, but I figured it was just stating the obvious. I turned the page. 2. She will not help you. She? Who was she? I flipped to the next page. 3. If you hear her crying, run. Okay, now I was officially freaked out. I quickly turned to the next page. 4. If you see her, it's too late. I slammed the memo pad shut and started pacing around the cabin. What the heck was going on? Who was this she? And why was I supposed to run if I heard her crying? This was definitely not in the job description. I tried to calm down, telling myself it was probably just some old ranger legend or something. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to sleep with my utility belt on, just in case. Better safe than sorry, right? I tossed and turned for what felt like hours, my mind racing with all sorts of crazy scenarios. Finally, I drifted off to sleep, but my dreams were filled with shadowy figures and eerie cries. I woke up to the sound of rain pounding on the roof. Great, just great. I couldn't even go for a walk to clear my head. I looked out the window, and a thick fog had rolled in, obscuring everything. I felt completely isolated. I was about to try to find a phone number for the ranger station when I saw someone climbing the stairs to my tower. I instinctively reached for my gun, but then I saw her face in the window. It was a young woman, maybe a little older than me, wearing a ranger uniform. She had a friendly smile and introduced herself as Autumn. Just wanted to say hi to the new guy, she said. I usually work at headquarters, but sometimes I help out the new recruits. Maybe I can give you a tour when the weather clears up. She was soaking wet, and I felt bad for her having to hike all the way out here in the rain. I invited her in, and we started chatting. She told me the phones didn't work anymore, and that they were just for decoration. Great, just what I needed to know. Then she mentioned that headquarters wanted me to check out a trail where a boulder had fallen and blocked the path. It was called the Boulder Ridge Loop, and it was west of my tower. I'd be happy to tag along if you want, she offered. It might be tough to find the trailhead on your first day. I was about to say yes when I remembered the memo pad. You work alone. She will not help you. Suddenly, I wasn't so sure about Autumn anymore. Was she from the memo pad? Was this some kind of test? I told her I needed to get changed, and she said she'd wait for me at the trailhead. As soon as she left, I grabbed the memo pad and reread the entries. My heart started pounding. I spent the next few hours pacing around the cabin, trying to decide what to do. Should I go with Autumn, or should I stay put and risk getting in trouble with headquarters? The rain finally started to let up, and I knew I had to make a decision. I grabbed my gear and headed for the door, my gut churning with anxiety. This was definitely not how I'd imagined my first day on the job. I crept towards the door, my heart pounding like a drum solo. I peeked through the window, and there she was, Autumn, standing at the base of the tower, staring up at me with this creepy, unblinking smile. It wasn't the friendly smile from before. This smile was predatory. Then I heard it. The crying. It was this high-pitched wail, like nails on a chalkboard, and it was coming from Autumn. It was so loud, so piercing, it made my head spin. If you hear her crying, run, the memo pad had warned. I didn't hesitate. I threw open the door and sprinted down the stairs, my boots clanging on the metal. But as I ran, I saw Autumn's eyes lock onto me. They were completely white, and her smile widened. Blood started pouring from her eyes, and her hair started falling out in clumps. If she sees you, it's too late. Panic surged through me. I whipped out my rifle and fired, hitting her square in the chest. She crumpled to the ground, blood pooling around her. I didn't stop to check if she was really dead. I just ran back inside, slammed the door, and barricaded it with everything I could find. I collapsed against the wall, my body shaking. What the hell had just happened? Was Autumn even human? What was that thing? I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was over. I had survived. All I had to do was wait until morning, then get the hell out of there. But then I remembered the memo pad. There were 5 important things, not 4. I picked it up, my hands trembling. 1. You work alone. 2. She will not help you. 3. If you hear her crying, run. 4. If you see her, it's too late. I turned to the last page, my heart pounding in my chest. 5. Do not try to kill her under any condition. She does not die. As I read those words, I heard the familiar pounding of footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. And the wailing started again, louder than before. I looked out the window, and there she was. Autumn, climbing the stairs. Her eyes were glowing white. Her smile was wider than ever, and blood was streaming down her face. She was back. I screamed and scrambled away from the window, my mind reeling. She couldn't die. I had shot her, but she was still alive. What was she? The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear her raspy breathing, her gurgling cries. She was right outside the door. I grabbed the rifle, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I knew it was useless, but I had to try. I had to defend myself. The door burst open, and Autumn lunged at me, her claws outstretched. I fired, but the bullet passed right through her. She screamed and tackled me to the ground, her weight crushing me. I struggled, trying to push her off, but she was too strong. Her claws raked across my face, and I felt warm blood trickle down my cheek. Her breath was hot and fetid in my face, and her eyes burned into mine with an unholy light. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end, but it never came. Instead, I heard a voice, a deep, booming voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "She is mine," the voice said. "You cannot kill her. She is bound to me." I opened my eyes, and Autumn was gone. I was alone in the cabin, my heart pounding, my body trembling. The voice echoed in my head, sending chills down my spine. I didn't know what had happened, but I knew one thing. I had to get out of that tower. I had to get as far away from that creature as possible. I stumbled to my feet and grabbed my backpack. I didn't bother packing anything else. I just wanted to get out of there. I ran down the stairs, not stopping until I reached the clearing. I looked back at the tower, its silhouette dark against the moonlit sky. I could have sworn I saw a figure standing in the window watching me. I turned and ran into the forest, the darkness swallowing me whole. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to escape the creature and the voice that haunted my every step. I ran until I collapsed, exhausted and terrified. I didn't know if I would ever be safe, if I would ever escape the horrors of that night. But I knew one thing. I would never forget the creature in the tower, the creature that could not die. The hallway was empty, just shadows stretching down the dimly lit corridor. I stepped out, rifle raised, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. My heart was still hammering in my chest. What the hell had that been? I crept down the hall, checking each room. Empty, empty, empty. I reached the end of the hall where a window looked out onto the woods. The moon was hidden behind clouds, casting the landscape in an eerie, silvery light. I scanned the tree line, but I couldn't see anything. Then I heard it, a soft clicking sound coming from outside. I moved closer to the window, peering out into the darkness. The clicking grew louder, more insistent. It sounded like claws on metal. I shone my flashlight on the source of the sound, and that's when I saw it. One of those creatures was clinging to the side of the tower. Its twisted body was contorted at an unnatural angle. Its long limbs splayed out like a spider. Its eyes, those white burning eyes, were fixed on me. It was clicking its teeth together, a low, guttural growl rumbling in its throat. I stumbled back from the window, my heart in my throat. The creature started to climb, its claws scraping against the metal siding. I raised my rifle, aiming at the window. But I hesitated. What if it shattered the glass? What if it got in? The creature reached the window, its face pressed against the glass. I could see its teeth, long and sharp, just inches away. It snarled, its breath fogging up the window. I squeezed the trigger, The gunshot echoed through the tower. The creature jerked back, its body riddled with bullets. It fell from the tower, landing with a sickening thud on the ground below. I didn't wait to see if it was dead. I ran back to my room, barricading the door. I grabbed my radio, frantically trying to contact Johnson. No response. The radio was dead. I was trapped, alone, with those things outside. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my room, rifle in hand, listening to the sounds of those creatures prowling around the tower. They scratched at the walls, howled at the moon, their cries echoing through the night. When dawn finally broke, I cautiously made my way outside. The creatures were gone, but they left behind a trail of destruction. The tower was scarred with claw marks, the ground littered with broken branches and blood stains. I knew then that this was just the beginning. Those creatures were out there, and they were coming for us, and we weren't ready. I never went back to that tower. I quit my job, left the park, and never looked back. I don't know what happened to the other rangers, or to Johnson. I don't want to know. But sometimes, late at night, I hear those screams again, and I remember those white, burning eyes staring at me through the darkness. And I know that those creatures are still out there, waiting for their next victim. I've always freaking loved the woods. Seriously, there's nothing like it. Being surrounded by nature, all that green and brown, the rivers and streams, the birds singing their little hearts out. It's like the whole forest is one big community, you know? The trees are all holding hands underground, sharing secrets. Okay, maybe I'm getting a little carried away, haha. But I'm a total nature nut. Ever since I was a kid at church camp and went on my first hike, I've been hooked. So last year I finally landed my dream job. Park ranger at Pukaskwa National Park in Ontario. It's the biggest park in the province, and I was stationed up north, way out in the boonies. Then the whole COVID thing hit, and the park shut down. Luckily, I kept my job. I ended up staying at HQ with a few other rangers. Normally, parks close for the winter anyway. It's way too dangerous for hikers and campers. But this time, we were closed the whole year. And here's the weird part. Some of us had to stay at HQ all winter. Not because of fire danger or anything. It was something else. I asked my co-worker Chris what was up, and he gave me this look like, "Dude, you serious? Don't worry about it, Max." He said, "It's no big deal. Sometimes people try to sneak into the park during the off-season, so they just want us to keep an eye out and make sure nobody gets hurt." Okay, that made sense. But still, I felt kinda uneasy about it. I know it sounds weird, but I've always had this thing about winter. It creeps me out. It's the most dangerous time to be in the woods. In spring, you worry about rain and getting hypothermia. In summer and fall, it's wildfires. And all year round, you gotta watch out for animals. But winter's different. The cold itself can kill you. Get caught in a blizzard, spend a night without shelter, and you're toast. Plus, the snow hides everything. One wrong step, and you could fall through the ice or into a tree well. The animals are mostly hibernating, which is supposed to be a good thing, but it just makes the whole place feel even creepier, like it's dead. Anyway, I was anxious about spending the winter so close to the woods. Every morning I'd wake up feeling this weird sense of dread. Even with 5 other people at HQ, I couldn't shake it. I'd be out on patrol, and I'd constantly be looking over my shoulder, checking for, I don't even know what. December rolled around, and it was Christmas Day. We had a little gift exchange, nothing fancy, just some small stuff to make HQ feel a bit more homey. We were having Christmas dinner when things took a turn. We were in the middle of dinner when bam, something slammed against the front door. We all jumped like a bunch of scared cats. For a second, nobody moved. We just stared at each other, totally confused. Then Thomas, one of the other rangers, went to check it out. We heard him curse from the doorway. That got us moving. On the front step, there was a deer head. Just the head, cleanly cut off, blood all over the place. The eyes were glazed over, staring into nothing. We'd all seen dead animals before, but this was different. It felt wrong. Chris, the most experienced ranger, was the first to speak. "Probably a prank," he said. "Someone's messing with us." The others nodded. "We should pair up and check the area. They can't have gotten far." So we bundled up and headed out. I was kind of bummed about leaving our Christmas dinner, but I wasn't going to complain. Someone could be hurt out there, even if they were jerks enough to leave a severed deer head on our doorstep. I got paired with Quinn. He'd been a ranger for about 6 years, so I felt pretty safe with him. We trudged through the snow, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. We chatted about the deer head, the gifts we'd gotten, that kind of stuff. Just trying to keep things light. Then Quinn got quiet for a minute. "Hey Max," he said. "Did anyone tell you about the year walk?" I shook my head. "The what?" He sighed. "Yeah, I figured. You seemed pretty confused when they told us we had to stay here all winter. So, what is it?" I asked. "It's this old Swedish tradition," he explained. "People walk through the woods on New Year's Eve until sunrise. They think it'll give them visions of the future or something. Like some kind of goat spirit will tell them what's going to happen in the new year." "Okay," I said, not really getting it. "What's the big deal?" "Apparently it's making a comeback," Quinn said. "Last year some idiots jumped the fence to do a year walk in the park. We found them half frozen to death. They survived, but..." He trailed off, like he didn't want to finish the sentence. "Anyway, that's why we're here. They don't want it happening again." He patted me on the back, but I still felt uneasy. The whole year walk thing sounded creepy as hell, like something out of a horror movie. We didn't find anyone that night. Neither did the other rangers, except for Thomas and Bree. They found the deer's body, frozen solid, slumped against a tree, and there were footprints all around it, leading off into the woods. That night, I couldn't sleep a wink. It wasn't just the deer head or the year walk. It was the thought of having to patrol the woods at night in the middle of winter. It terrified me. I know it's irrational, but I couldn't help it. The woods felt different at night, especially in winter, like something was watching me. In the wee hours of the morning, I was still awake, staring at the ceiling. Then I heard it, crunching snow outside my window, and the sound of bells. I got out of bed and peeked out the window. Nobody there, just the wind whistling through the trees. But there were footprints in the snow, fresh footprints. I opened the window and looked around. Nothing, just the empty woods. But the feeling of dread was growing stronger. The next morning, I woke up feeling like crap. My head was pounding, and I puked my guts out in the bathroom. My anxiety was through the roof. I was practically hyperventilating, trying not to sob out loud. I felt like I was going crazy, but I put on my uniform, plastered a fake smile on my face, and pretended everything was fine. I ate some cereal, chatted with Bree and Quinn, and then we headed out for our morning patrol. The snow had covered up the footprints outside my window, but I still felt like I was being watched. The day passed slowly. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night, I asked Chris if I could stay inside and do paperwork. He agreed. Thank God. But while the others were out on patrol, I heard it again. The crunching snow, the ringing bells, circling the HQ. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the dread kept building. That night I prayed. I hadn't prayed in years, but I was desperate. I prayed for a cold, a broken leg, anything to get me out of patrolling that night. No such luck. On New Year's Eve, I woke up an hour early. I went to the bathroom and splashed water on my face. My head was killing me. I felt dizzy and nauseous. I couldn't take it anymore. I broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. But I pulled myself together. I had to. I put on my uniform and went through the motions. I ate lunch, did some paperwork, and waited for nightfall. Finally, it was time. The snow was thick, the sky was clear, and the stars were out in full force. I was paired with Bree for the patrol. We started walking, but I could barely speak. I was too busy scanning the trees, my heart pounding in my chest. After a while, Bree stopped talking too. We walked in silence, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. I cleared my throat, about to say something, but then I realized Bree was gone. I spun around, looking for her, but she was nowhere to be found. And the woods, they looked different. The trees seemed taller, the shadows deeper. I felt like I was in a different place entirely. Then my flashlight died, and I started to panic. I fumbled for my walkie-talkie. "This is Maxwell," I stammered into the receiver, asking for backup. "Is anyone there?" Only static. I tried again and again, but there was no response. I was alone, completely alone. I sank to my knees in the snow, tears streaming down my face. Then I heard it, footsteps, crunching through the snow. I looked up, and there was a figure walking away from me. I scrambled to my feet and ran after it, yelling for it to stop, but it just kept going. I was so focused on catching up that I didn't see the tree root in front of me. I tripped and fell face first into the snow. When I looked up, the figure was gone, and then I heard the bells. I didn't want to turn around. I was terrified of what I might see, but the bells kept ringing, getting closer. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned around, and there they were. Two women, dressed in long white robes, their faces hidden behind veils. They each carried a bundle wrapped in blood-soaked cloth, and in their other hands they held bells, ringing them with every step. They walked past me, their voices flat and emotionless, speaking in a language I didn't understand. But I could feel the malice in their words. I followed them. I don't know why. I couldn't seem to help myself. It was like I was in a trance. We reached a frozen river. The women stopped at the edge and dropped their bundles onto the ice. The cloth fell open, revealing bones, tiny bones, baby bones. I felt sick. My stomach churned. but I couldn't look away. Then I saw other people emerging from the trees, all heading towards the same place. They were all different ages, different genders, different backgrounds, but they all had the same blank expression on their faces. We reached a clearing, and in the center there was a monument, a tall wooden pillar topped with a deer head. The head was impaled on a spike, its mouth gaping open, its eyes rolled back in its head, and at the base of the pillar, the deer's body, ripped open, its entrails spilling out onto the snow. The deer head started to speak. Its voice was deep and guttural, echoing through the clearing. It spoke of a gift, of a holy prophecy. I didn't understand the words, but I felt their meaning. The people in the clearing started to move. They crawled towards the deer's body, their hands reaching out for the bloody entrails. They started to eat. I felt a wave of nausea, but then I felt something else. Hunger. A deep, primal hunger. I sank to my knees and joined the feast. I shoved handfuls of raw flesh into my mouth, tears streaming down my face. I didn't want to do it, but I couldn't stop myself. The deer head spoke again. This time, it addressed me directly. It said I was different, that I wasn't meant to be there, but that I had been blessed, that I had received a gift. I didn't understand, but I kept eating. The world around me seemed to fade away. All I could see was the deer's body, the blood, the entrails. Then I passed out. When I woke up, I was back on the trail. Priya was shaking me, her face pale with fear. I looked down at myself, and I was covered in blood. They asked me what happened, but I couldn't remember. I just kept saying I didn't know. They were worried, but they didn't seem surprised. I got a few weeks off work. I couldn't go home because of the lockdown, so I stayed at HQ. The other rangers tried to be supportive, but nothing felt right anymore. I couldn't go near the woods. I could hear the trees whispering, the deer watching me with their human eyes. And when I slept, I could feel the forest breathing. It was alive, and it was hungry. I never went back to Pukasqua. I quit my job and left. I don't know what happened to the others. I don't want to know. But sometimes when I'm alone in the dark, I hear the bells ringing, and I remember the deer head, its eyes burning into mine. And I know that the forest is still out there, waiting for me to come back. So I landed this gig at Glen Rock State Park about 3 months ago. Figured it'd be a piece of cake, you know? It's not exactly some crazy mountain range crawling with wolves and whatnot. Just a pretty chill stretch of woods with mostly flat trails. Boy, was I wrong. Barely a few days in, I get called out on a search and rescue. Now, this place isn't exactly known for people getting lost. I mean, you see families with little kids strolling to the waterfall, joggers getting their sweat on, folks having picnics. It's pretty tame. The biggest thing you gotta worry about is the occasional black bear, which, okay, yeah, can be a bit hairy, but it's not like we're dealing with mountain lions or serial killers lurking in the bushes. Anyway, this missing person was a young woman, Heather Ricks, early 20s. She'd taken her dog for a walk on the Red Trail, a 3-mile loop, nothing too strenuous. Should have been a walk in the park, literally. But she never came back. Her boyfriend was freaking out, called the cops when he couldn't reach her. He was sure something was up. They had plans. She wasn't the type to just disappear. No phone activity, nothing. Vanished into thin air. So, we gear up for the search. It's me, Donnie, this rookie ranger who's still in college, and Miranda, a veteran ranger who's seen it all. We hit the red trail, eyes peeled for any sign of Heather, and that's when we found her dog, just wandering around a quarter-mile off the trail, totally wiped out. Donnie took the poor thing back to the station to get some food and water. We kept searching, but no Heather. Miranda just muttered, "Damn it, not another one." "Another one?" I asked. "People go missing here often." "We've had some bear attacks," she said. 3 in the last year. "Yeah, that was a mood killer." We pushed deeper into the woods. About halfway through, Miranda and I decided to split up. She headed south, I went north. "You got a compass, Mark?" she asked before we took off. "Nah, I've got my phone," I said. "Reception can be spotty," she warned, pulling out a compass. "Here, take this." I took it to be polite, but honestly, I wasn't worried. The park wasn't that big. I figured I'd have service everywhere. Famous last words, right? So I'm trekking through the woods, and I come across this stream. It's kind of weird, the water's black, but it's making this cool gurgling sound, like one of those white noise machines. Super chill. I pull out my phone, just to double check I'm heading in the right direction, and that's when things start to get a little off. The map on my phone doesn't show the stream, like at all. Usually there's a little blue line for even the smallest creeks, but this one? Nothing. I switched to satellite view, thinking maybe it's just hidden under the trees, but nope. Just a solid block of green. Guess the trees are pretty thick. I mumbled to myself. I walk over to the stream and the water's kind of warm. Not hot, but definitely warmer than it should be for November. I mean, it should be freezing, right? I shrugged it off and kept moving. "Heather," I yelled. "Heather, can you hear me?" Nothing, just the birds and the wind. I lose sight of the stream and keep heading north. Then, bam, I spot something. A purple knitted hat lying on the ground. My heart practically stopped. It was Heather's. Her boyfriend had mentioned it when he described what she was wearing. I had a whole mental list of things to look out for. I snapped a picture and texted it to Miranda and Donnie. No response. Figuring they were busy, I decided to keep going. Maybe Heather was still out there. Maybe she needed help. I kept my eyes glued to the ground, hoping to spot her white puffer jacket, her pink sneakers, anything that would pop against the brown leaves. And then I saw it, a flash of white. I ran towards it, and there it was, her jacket. But something wasn't right. It was laid out perfectly flat on the ground, not crumpled or anything like you'd expect if she'd been attacked or something. Just placed there, neatly, and zipped up. Wait a minute, zipped up? Someone had to have zipped it up after she took it off. Unless she took it off herself, zipped it up, and just left it there. But why? It was freezing out. No way she'd just ditch her jacket in the middle of the woods, unless someone else put it there for us to find. A shiver ran down my spine. The forest went silent. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just dead silence. And then ding, ding, ding. My phone went off. I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was Miranda. "Go back to the ranger station immediately." I looked at the picture of the hat I'd sent earlier. It was laid out flat too. I quickly took a picture of the jacket and sent it to her. I found her jacket, but it looks like it's been staged. 3 dots popped up. She was typing, "Get out of there now." Snap. A twig snapped somewhere nearby. I looked up, and there was movement in the trees. I couldn't see anything clearly, just a flicker of something in the shadows. I took off running. I was hauling ass, my heart pounding like a drum solo. I whipped out my phone to check my location, trying to get back to the trail. It felt like an eternity, but I finally stumbled onto the path. Even though my legs were screaming and my lungs were burning, I sprinted back towards the ranger station. I didn't stop running until I burst through the doors, gasping for air. I collapsed into a chair, trying to catch my breath. Miranda was on the phone, giving someone urgent instructions. She shot me a look, then continued into the receiver. "Yes, vacate immediately. Tell them it was another bear attack, and it isn't safe." She paused, then said, "Let me know when you're done," before hanging up. Turning to me, she said, "We're closing the park. Can you set up the closure signs at the trailhead?" She tossed me a roll of caution tape and a big red closed sign. Okay, I stammered, still trying to process everything. "Donnie should be back any minute. When you see him, tell him to help you clear out the parking lot. Davis and Jackie are clearing the trails." I had a million questions, but I did as I was told. Donnie showed up just as I was finishing up, and we started getting people out of the park. Within an hour, the place was deserted, the gates were locked, and the 5 of us were huddled inside the ranger station. Jackie, Davis, and Miranda were clearly in the know about something. They were having a hushed conversation in the back room with the door closed, which left me and Donnie in the main room twiddling our thumbs. "She doesn't want us to leave," I said, messing around on my phone. "Which is kinda dumb, 'cause we're not really doing anything here." "Hey, we're still getting paid, right?" Donnie replied. "I'm not complaining." "Yeah, guess you're right." An awkward silence fell between us. Donnie was like 10 years younger than me, and I had no idea what to say to the kid. "So she didn't tell you what's going on either?" I asked, trying to make conversation. He shook his head. "There's no way it's just bears," I said. "I think it's a serial killer," Donnie whispered, leaning in conspiratorially. "They just don't want to say it on the news and freak everyone out. I mean, laying out her clothes like that, trying to lure you in. That's totally something a serial killer would do." "Great. Thanks, Donnie. Real helpful." I got up and walked over to the window. It was getting dark outside, that deep blue twilight settling in. I could see some deer moving around, birds flying back to their nests. I reached out to close the curtains when something caught my eye. No way. The caution tape I'd just put up was ripped in half. The closed sign was lying on the ground. I squinted, my heart starting to hammer in my chest. It was fine just 20 minutes ago. Maybe it was a deer. Maybe it got tangled up in the tape and tore it down. But as I stared out into the darkness, I saw something else. A shape at the edge of the trees, on the other side of the parking lot. It wasn't moving. I tried to get a better look, but it was too dark. It could have been anything, a weird tree trunk, a bush, who knows. But the way my eyes were drawn to it, it felt like it hadn't been there before. Like someone was standing there watching. I squinted, trying to make it out. Just then the door creaked open behind me. I turned to see Miranda, Jackie, and Davis coming back into the room. Donnie jumped up and started peppering them with questions about the bear attacks. I turned back to the window, and my blood ran cold. The shape was gone. Okay, now I was officially freaked out. I mean, gone? 1 minute it's there, the next it's not. No way that was a tree or a bush. I spun around, ready to tell Miranda about the creepy disappearing figure, but she held up a hand, cutting me off. "Mark, Donnie," she said, her voice serious. "We need to talk." We all sat down around the big table in the main room. Miranda leaned forward, her expression grim. "What you saw out there, that wasn't a bear," she said. No kidding, I thought. "This park, it has a history," she continued, glancing at Davis and Jackie. "Things happen here that we can't explain. People go missing. Sometimes they come back different. Sometimes they don't come back at all." "Different how?" Donnie asked, his eyes wide. Jackie spoke up, her voice low. "Not all there. Like something's taken over, something else." Okay, now they were just messing with us, right? This had to be some kind of elaborate prank, but their faces were dead serious. "We think whatever it is, it's connected to the stream," Davis said. "That's why it doesn't show up on maps. It's not natural. And those clothes you found, Mark," Miranda added, "that's how it lures people in. It wants you to follow it." "Follow it where?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Miranda just shook her head. "We don't know, but we're not going to find out." She stood up. "We're leaving. Now, we're going to report this to the higher-ups, get the park permanently shut down. This isn't something we can handle." We all piled into Davis's truck, leaving the ranger station behind. As we drove away, I couldn't help but look back at the dark silhouette of the forest against the night sky. I thought I saw something move in the shadows, but I couldn't be sure. And as we drove through the gates and out onto the main road, I knew one thing for sure. I was never setting foot in Glen Rock State Park ever again.